Chapter 160. At the top of the prison pagoda, the sword trembled for a moment before returning to normal. However, Yi Xian did not realize it. Outside the pagoda, Yi Xian spread his arms and greedily absorbed the fresh air around him. At this moment, he felt extremely relaxed. This relaxation was not only in his heart, but also in his mind. Previously, his understanding of his sword principle was somewhat vague. This vagueness meant that he did not have a clear understanding of his sword principle. Not to mention his sword principle, he did not even have a concept of sword intent. But now, everything was clear. It felt like the clouds had parted, and he could see the clear sky. Good and evil. One thought could be good, and the other could be evil. Actually, previously, his sword intent was not considered good and evil sword intent. It was only the embryonic form of good and evil sword intent. However, the moment his mind was clear, his sword intent was considered to have reached the level of good and evil sword intent. Yi Xian realized that his sword intent was much stronger than before. If he were to encounter the man in gray who had fought with him previously, he was confident that he could kill him within 5 moves. And this was under the situation where he did not have to decide life and death with one strike. Was sword intent divided into realms? Yi Xian had some doubts in his mind, but unfortunately, he did not get an answer. This was because Sister Sword Celestial was still in a deep sleep. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian walked along the river. He extended his right hand to the right with his palm facing outwards. A light breeze brushed past, and he felt a chill in his palm. Sensation. Just like when he was cultivating the sword eye, he could sense everything around him. However, this time, he was not just sensing, he was also borrowing. When he was fighting with the gray-clothed man, he fused his battle will and sword intent into his sword force. At that moment, an idea popped into his mind. Since battle will and sword intent could be fused into his force, why couldn't other things do the same? For example, the wind or the earth. Yi Xian stepped on the ground. This time, he did not activate the Tao Law, because the Tao Law belonged to someone else. It was ready-made and did not belong to him. Just like that, Duan Ling Tian's body emitted a strand of force as he walked. Sword momentum. Gradually, countless battle will and sword will melded into his force, and the wind that passed through his palm suddenly stopped, and then gathered into his force. Not only that, but the ground under his feet suddenly trembled. Very soon, the power of the earth flowed from his feet to his body, and finally gathered into his force like a tide. At this moment, the aura emanating from his body was even more terrifying. On the surface of the river on his right, the water was boiling. At the same time, with every step he took, the ground in front of him would crumble force. Take advantage of the situation. At this moment, Yi Xian was very excited because he realized that he could really borrow power. Not only could it be borrowed, but it could also be fused. He fused all of this into his force. For example, battle intent, sword intent. When all of these were integrated into his sword force, it was no longer just a sword force. The momentum had already transformed. More accurately, it was no longer just a person's momentum. A person's momentum was still limited to him. It was like a cup of water. The capacity of the cup was limited. But if this cup was placed into a basin and broken, the water would increase. This force was like water. If he wanted to store more, he had to break through his own shackles. Yi Xian walked forward slowly, gradually on his right. This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page. A powerful force appeared in the river. Water force. The water force gathered towards him bit by bit. Bang. The ground under Yi Xian's feet was no longer collapsing, but completely shattered. The force that gathered on his body was so strong that the ground under his feet could no longer bear it. It was unstoppable. Together with his good and evil sword will, he could easily kill a Nether Passage realm expert with this force. If he fought against the man in gray again, he was confident that he could kill him in 3 strikes. If he used life and death with one sword, he could do it with one strike. A person's strength could not be measured by their realm. Concept, momentum, combat experience, and equipment. None of these could be lacking. At this moment, other than his realm, he had reached his peak in all other aspects. If he reached the Divine Unity realm, his strength would undergo a qualitative transformation. Yi Xian suddenly stopped and pressed his right hand down. Disperse. As he spoke, the force that gathered on his body disappeared without a trace. The river regained its calm. Sword master. Yi Xian's lips curled up slightly. He should be considered a sword master now. As if he thought of something, he pointed his finger forward. An array of sword light flashed. 300 feet away, a tree branch fell with a crack. Just as it was about to hit the ground, the Spirit Elegance sword suddenly appeared. The tree branch landed firmly on the Spirit Elegance sword. The next moment, with a flash of sword light, the Spirit Elegance sword appeared in front of him. The smile on Yi Xian's face gradually widened. Compared to before, his current Imperial sword technique had undergone a qualitative transformation, be it in terms of speed or strength. Most importantly, he was now able to control the sword with ease. It was not stiff at all. It was as if the sword was part of his hand. At this moment, an old man appeared in front of Yi Xian, the fifth-floor master of the Drunken Immortal Inn. Yi Xian tapped his right foot lightly and activated the Dao Law. The aura on his body was instantly concealed by the Dao Law. To be precise, he was using the power of the earth to conceal himself. A long time ago, he had already discovered that this Dao Law could conceal his aura and realm. However, there was no need for him to conceal himself previously. But now, he didn't want to reveal his true strength. He wanted to keep a trump card, as it would have an unexpected effect. The fifth-floor master walked in front of Yi Xian and smiled bitterly. Little friend, clasp your fists. My Drunken Immortal Inn has chosen to withdraw from this matter. Yi Xian's expression was calm as he nodded slightly. I have expected it. The fifth-floor master shook his head. Apologies. Yi Xian smiled. Senior, please don't say that. I am already greatly indebted to the Drunken Immortal Inn. As he spoke, he said seriously, it is a favor for the Drunken Immortal Inn to help me. Even if you don't help me, it is also your duty. Moreover, during this period of time, the Drunken Immortal Inn has helped me several times when I was in danger. I, Yi Xian, will never forget this favor. If the Drunken Immortal Inn needs anything in the future, I, Yi Xian, will not shirk my duty. The fifth-floor master had a complicated look in his eyes. If he helped Yi Xian in the beginning, because he wanted to rope in the sword immortal behind Yi Xian, then now, he really admired Yi Xian. Although Yi Xian was impulsive at times, he was a very loyal person. Back then, Kuraki Academy not accepting Yi Xian was definitely the stupidest decision in 100 years. If such a genius was accepted, as long as you treated him well, he would use his life to repay you. Just like Old Man Ji, Azure Billow Academy. The fifth-floor master shook his head and sighed. He spread his hands, and a long box appeared in his hands. He handed the box to Yi Xian. Young friend, this is what you need. Yi Xian opened the box. Inside the box there were two swords that looked exactly the same. The swords were longer, about 5 feet long. If this chapter is not finished, please continue. The swords were very narrow, less than a finger's length. Thin swords. The fifth-floor master said softly. These two swords are called Jiaying. They are not ordinary swords, but flying swords. They are custom-made for sword immortals, who mainly use sword kinesis. If young friend can use sword kinesis, with this sword, your power will increase by at least 2 times. My Drunken Immortal Inn has already erased Swordsman's imprint. Young friend, you can use it at any time. Jiaying. Yi Xian faced the box, and with a flick of his right hand's fingers, the two swords flew out of the box. Yi Xian pointed his fingers forward. In an instant, the two swords appeared behind 2 trees 500 feet away. The next moment, the two swords returned to Yi Xian. 500 feet away, at the top of the 2 trees, 2 leaves fell slowly. Seeing this scene, the fifth-floor master was a little shocked. He knew that Yi Xian knew how to ride a sword, but he never imagined that the speed of Yi Xian's sword would be this fast. It was so fast that even he was a little shocked. This was not a speed that a Nether Passage Realm cultivator could achieve. In front of the fifth-floor master, Yi Xian gently stroked the 2 swords. He exclaimed, Jiaying, what a good sword. The 2 swords seemed to sense something. They trembled slightly, and let out a soft sword hum. Yi Xian laughed and put away the 2 swords. Then, he cupped his fists at the fifth-floor master. "Senior, thank you." After saying this, he took out a gold card. At this moment, the fifth-floor master suddenly shook his head. "No need. This sword is a gift from my drunken immortal inn." Yi Xian shook his head and said seriously, "Friendship is friendship, business is business." After saying this, he took out a gold card and placed it in front of the fifth-floor master. Seeing that the fifth-floor master did not accept it, he said seriously, "If Senior does not accept it, I will not trouble the drunken immortal inn anymore." Hearing this, the fifth-floor master smiled bitterly and put away the 2 gold cards. In the gold cards, there were 200 million gold coins. Yi Xian smiled. "Senior, if it is possible, I may have to trouble your inn for information in the future. Apart from that, if I want to sell anything, I may have to look for you." The fifth-floor master said seriously, "The higher-ups have already instructed that as long as it is within the scope of the Drunken Immortal Inn's ability, the Drunken Immortal Inn will do its best to help you. However, this expert," Yi Xian smiled. "It is enough. Senior, we will meet again." After saying this, he turned and left. The fifth-floor master glanced at Yi Xian and said softly, "If he does not fall, he will definitely become a sword immortal in the future." After saying this, he turned and disappeared on the spot. Yi Xian came to the city wall of Mizar City. Along the way, countless soldiers saluted and looked at Yi Xian with excitement. "Swordsman, the swordsman of Jiang country." This was the honor of Jiang country. Yi Xian came to Jiang Jiu's side. Jiang Jiu looked at the end of the city wall and said softly, "They have not retreated yet." Yi Xian looked into the distance. At the end of his sight, he could still see a dense army. Chu country's cavalry. At this moment, a group of cavalry suddenly came from afar. There were not many of them, only about 20 people. From their clothes, they were not Chu country's soldiers. Beside Yi Xian, Jiang Jiu said in a deep voice, "Great Cloud Country's soldiers." Great Cloud Country finally appeared. Yi Xian faced the city wall. At this moment, the 20 people had already reached the city wall. The middle-aged man in the lead raised his head and looked at Yi Xian and Jiang Jiu. "Surrender, or die." At this moment, a sword suddenly pointed at the middle-aged man's forehead. On the city wall, Yi Xian faced down. "The wind is too strong. I did not hear you clearly. Please say it again." Everyone. End of this chapter. Chapter 161. The battlefield suddenly quietened down. Below the city, the 20 or so cavalrymen stared at Yi Xian, especially the middle-aged man who was leading them. Although a sword was pressed against his forehead, there was no fear in his eyes. "If you don't surrender, the day the army enters the city will be the day you will be beheaded." Yi Xian gave the middle-aged man a thumbs up. "You've got guts." The middle-aged man sneered. "Kill me? You won't dare even if you have 100 guts." Yi Xian was puzzled. "Why?" The middle-aged man pointed at himself. "I'm a soldier of Great Cloud Empire. I'm here on behalf of Great Cloud Empire. If you kill me, Great Cloud Empire." Chi. The elegant spirit sword suddenly pierced through the middle-aged man's forehead. The middle-aged man's voice stopped abruptly. His eyes were wide open and filled with disbelief. On the city wall, Yi Xian opened his palm, and the elegant spirit sword flew into his hand. A drop of blood slowly dripped from the tip of the sword. Yi Xian looked at the middle-aged man and shook his head. "How dare you threaten me like this? Don't I have any face?" The middle-aged man was speechless. A few breaths later, the middle-aged man fell from his horse, but his eyes were wide open. He died with everlasting regret. The rest of the Great Cloud Empire soldiers were enraged when they saw the middle-aged man was killed. One of them pointed at Yi Xian and said angrily, "How dare you kill our Great Cloud Empire?" Chi. Without any warning, a sword suddenly pierced through the soldier's throat. The soldier fell to the ground from his horse. Blood spurted out of his throat. Staring at Yi Xian, he held his throat with both hands. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not stop the blood from spurting out. Yi Xian turned to the rest of the soldiers. "Do you have anything to say about their fate?" At this moment, the soldiers were horrified. At the same time, they realized that this guy wasn't afraid of Great Cloud Empire at all. "Run!" Without any hesitation, The remaining dozen cavalrymen turned and fled. Jiang Jiu suddenly asked beside Yi Xian, "Why didn't you kill them all?" Yi Xian smiled and turned to face the soldiers on the wall. "Do you see that? This was the power of Great Cloud Empire. The soldiers of Great Cloud Empire weren't invincible. They could still be killed and cowered. So why should the men of Jiang be afraid of the Great Cloud Empire? If one comes, we'll kill one. Even if we die, we'll take one down with us." On the city wall, the soldiers who had solemn expressions suddenly became excited. Countless soldiers roared in unison, "Kill whoever comes! I'll kill whoever comes!" His voice was like thunder, resounding through the clouds. Sensing this scene, Yi Xian smiled. Morale. The small countries in Qing province were actually in awe of Great Cloud Empire, because it was the largest empire in Qing province. In fact, Great Cloud Empire had once annihilated a country with a team of 100 cavalrymen. Therefore, these soldiers were very fearful of Great Cloud Empire. If they did not raise the morale of these soldiers, the state of Jiang would have been defeated before the battle even started. Jiang Jiu glanced at Yi Xian, with an undetectable curve on the corner of her mouth. Yi Xian suddenly said, "I'm going back to Azure Waves Academy." Jiang Jiu asked, "When will you be back?" Yi Xian answered, "Soon." Jiang Jiu sighed, "If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. I'll wait for you." Yi Xian nodded. Because of Shaoan Chu Kuraki Academy, and Dark World won't make a move for a while. But be careful. I'll be back in 2 days at the latest. Finishing his words, he turned and left. Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian's back until Yi Xian disappeared at the end of the horizon. Yi Xian didn't ride the cloud ship. Instead, he rode the black wolf that Lu Banzwang left for him. Because the speed of the black wolf had surpassed the cloud ship, it would take him at most half a day to return to Azure Waves Academy from Mizar City. He had to make a trip back to Azure Waves Academy, because it was impossible to resist Chu's army with the military strength of Turom City, especially when Great Cloud Empire was involved. He had to find reinforcements. As for the 2 Jiaying swords, he didn't devour them, because he found it hard to reach Spirit Unite Realm, with 2 bright grade swords given his current realm. He needed at least 5 swords. Under such circumstances, it was better to keep the 2 swords. Now that he had the 2 swords, his combat strength would rise to a new level. 100 miles away from Mizar City was the encampment of Chu's army. Inside a tent. Impudent! A bellow suddenly sounded. Inside the tent, a middle-aged man clad in iron armor glared at a soldier kneeling on the ground in front of him. His eyes were filled with malevolence. Does Jiang country really humiliate my Great Cloud Empire? The soldier lowered his head, replying to General, what this subordinate said was true. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes. Pass down my order. Great Cloud Cavalry assemble. At this moment, a white-robed elder and a black shadow suddenly appeared in the tent. The white-robed elder glanced at the soldier kneeling on the ground. Stand down. The soldier hurriedly retreated. The white-robed elder looked at the middle-aged man. General Li Feng, did King Kaoshan tell you to listen to my orders? The middle-aged man named Li Feng's expression was rather unsightly. The white-robed elder said indifferently, General Li, that Yi Xian even dared to slaughter my Kuraki Academy. Do you think he's afraid of your Great Cloud Empire? Not only is he extremely talented, but he also has a sword immortal backing him. Moreover, Enlancio suddenly came back to help him. Before we figure out Nguesher's intention, you're not allowed to organize anything. Otherwise, you'll be punished according to the military order. Li Feng clenched his fists and his face was livid, but he still nodded. The white-robed elder's expression was also somewhat unsightly. Because of Enlancio, they were now in a deadlock here. The reason why they didn't dare to make a move was that they hadn't found out Enlancio's identity and background. Most importantly, they were afraid that the force behind Enlancio would also join in. It was precisely because of this that Jiang Country and Dark World didn't dare to act rashly. But if they didn't make a move, he was afraid. He was afraid of giving Yi Xian more time to grow. Previously at Mizar City, Yi Xian had almost taken advantage of the situation to become a sword master. At that moment, he was really terrified. Because once Yi Xian became a sword master, It meant that Kuraki Academy and Dark World wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Because the geniuses they could invite were at most those who were below the top 20 on the demon-level geniuses list. If they went any higher, the price would be too great. And if Yi Xian became a sword master, then they would have to invite the top 10 geniuses on the demon-level geniuses list to have a chance of killing Yi Xian. As for the top 10 geniuses, Kuraki Academy wouldn't be able to come into contact with them. Moreover, these geniuses wouldn't lack money, because they were already on another level. So, once Yi Xian became a sword master, under the situation that the Myriad Law's realm didn't appear. This chapter isn't over, please continue to the next page. At that time, the situation between Kuraki Academy and Dark World would become very, very bad. Fortunately, Yi Xian had failed. Outside the city, he heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Yi Xian hadn't succeeded in taking advantage of the situation. So long as Yi Xian hadn't attained the Sword Master realm, then they were still able to kill Yi Xian without paying too great of a price. But now Enlancio had appeared. When he thought of Enlancio, the white-robed old man's face instantly sank. She really is an extraordinary genius. The problem was why Yi Xian knew such a genius? The nearby mistress of the Dark World suddenly said, "Brother Li Mu, do we need to invite those Dao protectors?" "Dao protectors?" The white-robed old man called Li Mu said in a low voice. "If we invite them, then we'll probably have to pay a great price." The mistress of the Dark World said, "Only they would be able to find out exactly who that woman is." Li Mu fell silent. Right at this moment, a black-clothed old man suddenly appeared here. Li Mu's eyes instantly narrowed slightly when he saw this black-clothed old man, and he was slightly vigilant. Because this person was precisely the person that followed by Enlancio's side that day. The black-clothed old man glanced at the nearby mistress of the Dark World who'd concealed herself. "Don't make a fool of yourself with this inferior concealment technique of yours." As soon as he finished speaking, he lightly stomped his right foot on the ground. Bang! A muffled bang resounded from the corner of a wall that was over 10 m away. And then a middle-aged man that wore a black robe appeared within everyone's field of vision. He'd revealed his true form with a single strike. The mistress of the Dark World looked at the black-clothed old man with dense fear in her eyes. The black-clothed old man looked at the white-robed old man. "I know what all of you are worried about. Don't worry, we won't interfere in the matter between all of you and Yi Xian." Li Mu frowned slightly. "Why?" A wisp of a cold smile suffused the corners of the black-clothed old man's mouth. "Because we want him dead as well. However, because of young Missin, we can't make a move. No matter if it's in the open or in the dark, we can't make a move. Of course, she can't make a move as well." Li Mu said in a low voice. "Who exactly are you?" The black-clothed old man said indifferently. "This has nothing to do with all of you. I've only come to tell all of you that you can deal with that Yi Xian as you please. This person is only in the Nether Passage realm. Even though he's a grandmaster of the Way of the Sword, he shouldn't be much to your Kuraki Academy and the Dark World." As he spoke, he stood up. "I'll give you a suggestion. If you want to make a move again, it's best to gather all of your strength and kill him in one strike. Don't go one by one for him to practice on." Li Mu glanced at the black-clothed old man. "This person isn't as simple as you think." The black-clothed old man snorted coldly. "If it wasn't for young Missin, killing him would be as easy as snapping a finger. What all of you did earlier was truly foolish to the extreme. If you gather all of your strength, wouldn't it be a simple matter to kill him?" As he spoke, he turned to leave. However, he quickly stopped. "There's already someone rushing over from the Central Divine Prefecture. He'll be here soon. When the time comes, he'll assist all of you. At that time, I hope that all of you will use all of your strength and use all of your trump cards to kill this person in one strike." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure trembled and vanished. Within the tent, Li Mu and the mistress of the Dark World exchanged a glance. A moment later, Li Mu said in a low voice, "The mistress of the Dark World, immediately summon the Dao soldiers of the Dark World. Generally, immediately summon the Great Cloud Cavalry. Tell them to be ready at any time. Once Yi Xian dies, immediately break into the city, and let the state of Jiang accompany him in death." As he spoke, he slowly closed his eyes. This time we'll succeed or die trying. End of this chapter. Chapter 162. Songlan Academy. At the foot of Mount Ji Yunshan, Yi Xian was stunned by the scene in front of him. At this moment, there were many people gathered at the foot of Mount Ji Yunshan. They were all looking up at Mount Ji Yunshan with eyes filled with anticipation. Yi Xian walked to a man's side. "Brother, what are you waiting for?" The man glanced at Yi Xian. "You don't know." Yi Xian shook his head. "Please tell me." The man said, "State Scholar Yi Xian is coming back." Yi Xian was speechless. The man was excited. "It is said that he will return to Songlan Academy today. Therefore, we are all waiting here. I am already waiting here at daybreak." Yi Xian was stunned for a while before he said, "Everyone here is waiting for him?" The man nodded. "Yes, some of the people in front are even crazier. They came before daybreak." Yi Xian asked again, "How do you know he will return today?" The man smiled. "It's spread throughout the capital." Yi Xian shook his head. It was probably Jiang Jiu who informed the king of Jiang, and then spread the news. This was nothing a small matter. Yi Xian patted the man's shoulder. "Yi Xian is just an ordinary person. There's nothing to see. Go back and have a good life." *T. The man suddenly flew into a rage. How can State Scholar Yi be an ordinary person? He is a state scholar of Jiang, a swordsman of Jiang. How dare you insult him? With that he threw a punch at Yi Xian. Insult him? Yi Xian was stunned. What did he say? Sensing the man's punch, Yi Xian lightly tapped the tip of his foot and retreated a few feet. The man's punch missed, and he was instantly stunned. At this moment, some people in the surroundings were already looking in their direction. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, a masked teenager suddenly pointed at Yi Xian angrily. "I heard him insult State Scholar Yi." Yi Xian was speechless. Some people instantly looked at Yi Xian when they heard the young man, and their eyes burned with rage. Yi Xian. In the hearts of the people of the state of Jiang, this name could not be said to be sacred, but it was definitely not to be offended. What Yi Xian had done in the Tang Kingdom had already spread throughout the entire Jiang Kingdom. His current fame was far greater than in Lan Xiu's. That was not the main point. The main point was that Yi Xian was defending the state of Jiang, fighting to protect the state of Jiang. He was a kingdom knight of Jiang country. He was also the swordsman of the kingdom of Jiang. A man suddenly walked up to Yi Xian. He sized up Yi Xian and asked in confusion, "Why do you look so familiar?" Yi Xian was speechless. Familiar? How could he not be familiar? Aren't you waiting for me? Actually, it was normal that these people didn't know him, because he wasn't so famous when he was in the state of Jiang. Therefore, many people had never seen him before. Even if they had seen him before, they had only seen him once from afar. It was just a brief encounter. Naturally, Yi Xian did not want the misunderstanding to continue. He was about to explain when the man who had attacked him earlier suddenly said, "This guy looks shifty-eyed. I can tell he's not a good person at first glance. Why don't we beat him up first?" Yi Xian's face darkened. "Shifty eyes? Fuck, I don't even have eyes. Even if you want to beat me up, can't you find another reason?" At this moment, an exclamation suddenly resounded. "It's Yi Xian." In next to no time, the crowd parted, and a woman walked over from afar. She was young, petite, and wore a dark green dress. There was a small braid on the back of her head. As she walked through the crowd, the braid swayed gently, and she looked extremely cute. Yi Xian. She was now a little famous in Songlan Academy, and the imperial capital, because of her achievements in various aspects. Most importantly, she was the youngest among all the students in Songlan Academy. Hence, she was the most doted upon in the academy. Yi Xian glanced at the people in front of her. "Why are you making a ruckus here?" At this moment, the man who wanted to beat Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Miss Yi, someone is insulting State Scholar Yi." Hearing this, Yi Xian's face immediately turned cold. "Who?" The man pointed at Yi Xian, who was not far away, and the crowd hurriedly moved aside. When Yi Xian followed the man's finger and saw Yi Xian, she was immediately stunned on the spot. Yi Xian walked in front of Yi Xian and smiled. "What's wrong? Don't you recognize me?" Yi Xian came back to her senses. She clenched her dress tightly and said nervously, "Tang, Dean, Dean." When they heard these two words, the crowd instantly quieted down. At the side, the young man who wanted to beat Yi Xian directly sat on the ground. He was somewhat at a loss. "Who am I? What did I do?" "Everyone." Yi Xian looked around and smiled. "Thanks to everyone's kindness, I waited here. Now that everyone has seen me, I'm just an ordinary person. There's nothing special about me. Everyone can disperse." After saying that, he turned to Yi Xian. "Return to the courtyard." Yi Xian hurriedly nodded, and then obediently stood behind Yi Xian. Soon, Yi Xian and Yi Xian disappeared from everyone's sight. At the side, the young man sitting on the ground was still at a loss. "I actually wanted to beat him just now." In front of Conglan Palace, Yi Xian stopped in his tracks. Not far in front of him was Jianji. Jianji walked in front of Yi Xian and said softly, "You're back." Yi Xian nodded. "Is everything okay?" Jianji nodded slightly. "Yes." Yi Xian said, "Gather all the students." Jianji glanced at Yi Xian, and then turned to leave. In less than 15 minutes, all the students gathered in front of Kanglan Hall. Looking at Yi Xian on the stage, the eyes of the students were filled with excitement and admiration. Kanglan Academy's current status in Jiang Country was very high. The people of Jiang Country respected Kanglan Academy from the bottom of their hearts. Now, everyone in Jiang Country was truly proud to be a student of Kanglan Academy, and all of this was because of Yi Xian. On the left and right of Yi Xian were Jianji and Baizhe. Yi Xian took a step forward and glanced below him. There was a total of 42 students here. Amongst them, 21 were at the Skyfall realm, 9 were at the Nether Passage realm, and the rest were at the Qi-controlling realm. Yi Xian pondered deeply for a moment before he said, "All of you should be aware that the armies of Chu, Yu, and Great Cloud Empires have arrived. There are 100,000 Chu cavalry outside Mizar City, and there are even Great Cloud Empires amongst them. If Mizar City is breached, then the Chu cavalry will be unobstructed, and they'll march all the way south. Countless people of Jiang Country will die at their hands." When he spoke up to this point, his voice gradually grew louder. "I've returned this time to ask all of you if all of you are willing to head to Mizar City with me and pledge your life to defend Jiang Country? Join the army?" The surroundings suddenly fell silent. Obviously, they hadn't expected that Yi Xian would ask them to join the army. Yi Xian spoke softly. "If the city is breached, then the Jiang Country will perish. How could my Kanglan Academy be spared? Of course, I won't force all of you if you're unwilling." Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly stood forward. "I'm willing to head to Mizar City." As soon as Yi Xian stood forward, more and more people stood forward as well. Yi Xian felt slightly gratified when he noticed that all of them were willing to head to Mizar City, and he spoke softly. "Do all of you know that most of you might not be able to return from this trip to Mizar City?" A man who stood before Yi Xian grinned. "Dean, you've been fighting for Mizar City all this while. How could we be afraid of death when our Jiang Country is fighting with our lives on the line? We want to fight by the side of the Dean, and we can't bring shame to the Dean. Right? We're willing to live and die with the Dean." "I don't agree." Right at this moment, a cold shout suddenly resounded from the side. Yi Xian turned his head to look. Not far away, 2 people were walking over quickly. He naturally knew these 2 people. They were the 2 scholars he had invited, Mo Yuan and Feng Lan. Mo Yuan quickly walked in front of Yi Xian and looked straight at Yi Xian. "Have you ever thought that although these students' cultivation levels aren't low, they lack actual combat experience? If you bring them to the battlefield, many of them will die." Yi Xian calmly replied, "It's precisely because they lack actual combat experience that we need more." Mo Yuan said in a deep voice, "You're spoiling the seedlings through excessive enthusiasm. Do you know that if you bring them to the battlefield, these geniuses that you've painstakingly nurtured might all die? All your painstaking efforts and Old Man Ji's last wish will go up in smoke." "You." Yi Xian shook his head and interrupted Mo Yuan. "If the country perishes, how can the students of Kanglan Academy be safe? We are students of Kanglan Academy, but we are also citizens of Jiang Country. We are not superior to others. We have the same responsibility to protect this country Mo Yuan looked at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Yi Xian continued, I don't want my students to be a flock of captive sheep. They must go out and experience the cruelty of war. For them, this is also a kind of cultivation. Otherwise, if Kanglan Academy is in danger one day, they won't even have the strength to fight. After seeing Ling Han, Lu Kuang, and the other geniuses of the divine central continent, he understood one thing. If they only cultivated at home and didn't go out to explore, they would be trash for the rest of their lives. Ling Han and the members of the 9th Mercenary Troop, did they cultivate? No. They had fought their way out. They experienced countless battles of life and death to reach the strength they had today. If the students of Kanglan Academy didn't go out and fight, they would never be able to compare to the geniuses and monsters of the divine central continent. A piece of iron would never become a sharp sword if it wasn't tempered thousands of times. Mo Yuan looked at Yi Xian for a long time. Gradually his expression softened. Follow me. Yi Xian was a little puzzled, because he realized that Mo Yuan and Feng Lan were a little mysterious. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian followed. The three of them arrived at the back of the mountain. Mo Yuan stopped and turned to look at Yi Xian. He opened his palm, and a box appeared in his hand. Yi Xian was a little puzzled. What's this? Mo Yuan opened the box. Inside the box were 12 little golden men, each holding a golden spear in their hands. Mo Yuan looked at Yi Xian. The 12 golden men were once forged by an extremely talented emperor, who gathered all the pure gold from the 9 prefectures in the world. Each golden man hides a formation within. Once spirit energy is injected into the formation and activated, the golden men can suppress the 9 prefectures. However, they were once heavily injured, and their spirituality is damaged. Now they are only equivalent to divine unity tier cultivators. Moreover, because the formation has been damaged, activating it requires many supreme grade spirit tools. Yi Xian solemnly asked, how's the power? Mo Yuan gently flicked his right hand. One of the golden men in the box suddenly turned into a golden light and landed to the side. At this moment, the small golden man had turned into a big golden man that was much bigger than Yi Xian. Mo Yuan indifferently said, give it a try. Yi Xian flicked his finger, and a sword ray suddenly struck the golden man. The golden man didn't move. The sword didn't even leave a mark on it. Yi Xian's face changed. His sword was a real sword. A moment later, Yi Xian turned to Mo Yuan. Conditions. Mo Yuan looked straight at Yi Xian. Join my Confucian Tao, and become the representative of my Confucian Tao. If you're willing, my Confucian Tao will support you. P.S. I might be on leave because I'm going to Guangzhou. I have activities every day, so I don't have any time to write. I can't take it anymore. His schedule for the day was too full. Sorry. Genius 1 second remember website. Mobile version. Chapter 163. The Confucian Tao. Yi Xian frowned when he heard Mo Yuan. The Confucian Tao? Mo Yuan nodded. An ancient cultivation force. Due to some special reasons, its orthodoxy collapsed and only a few inheritances were left. To tell you the truth, we are the successors of the Confucian Tao, and we shoulder the heavy responsibility of reviving the Confucian Tao. Yi Xian asked in a deep voice, why me? Mo Yuan shook his head and chuckled. We've been to Azure Billow Continent and Azure Billow Academy. We've also come to Azure Prefecture, and come into contact with Kuraki Academy. Although these 2 academies are called academies, they don't have an academic branch. They only focus on the cultivation and strength of their students, not on their knowledge and thoughts. He looked at Yi Xian and said, just when we were about to give up, Imperial Preceptor Lu asked us to come here and have a look. You've surprised us. We've seen hope here, and you're outstanding enough to reach the Sword Master level at such a young age. It's truly surprising. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, you can see through me. There was a trace of shock in his voice, because he'd used a Tao law to conceal his strength. Mo Yuan smiled. If I'm not wrong, you should have a Tao law, right? Tao law. Yi Xian's expression turned slightly solemn. I've seriously underestimated them. Mo Yuan added, don't worry. We have no ill intentions towards you. And we wouldn't dare to. We wouldn't dare. They'd seen the mysterious woman in the prison pagoda when she went on a rampage. Sword Immortal? They'd seen Sword Immortals. And some of the abilities of this mysterious woman weren't something a Sword Immortal could achieve. Every time they thought of this, they broke out in cold sweat. Because this mysterious woman might not just be a Sword Immortal, she might even be above it. Of course, the reason they'd chosen Yi Xian was because of Yi Xian's original intention of establishing the academy. Yi Xian paid attention to academics in his country. This was exactly what they needed, because what they needed to do was to spread academics and spread their own Confucian ideology. If Zhonglan Academy grew bigger and bigger, its influence would naturally grow bigger and bigger in the future. At that time, Confucian ideology and academics would be able to be spread even more. Another point was that Yi Xian was strong enough. Without strength, without potential, everything else was just bullshit. On the field, Yi Xian was silent. Mo Yuan and Mo Xian quietly waited for Yi Xian's reply. After a while, Yi Xian said, "I don't understand Confucianism." "You don't have to worry about that," said Mo Yuan with a smile. "You can fire us at any time if you feel that there's something wrong with our Confucian Tao in the future. As for you joining my Confucian Tao, it is just a formality. In the future, you can join any faction. As for my Confucian Tao spokesperson, it is just a title. There is no restriction. It is just that in the future, when the two of us use Azure Billow Academy to promote Confucian Tao, we will use your name. Of course, the two of us will do our best to protect Azure Billow Academy and you." On the side, Feng Lan suddenly said, "To put it simply, it is equivalent to us cooperating. There is no superior and subordinate relationship. Everyone will help each other and cooperate for a win-win situation." Yi Xian smiled. "In that case, I naturally have no problem with it." Hearing this, Mo Yuan and Feng Lan both smiled. Mo Yuan handed the box to Yi Xian. Yi Xian didn't stand on ceremony. He accepted the box and said, "How do I use this?" Mo Yuan said, "The 12 golden men need to be activated with spiritual energy. Each activation requires at least 100,000 top-grade spirit stones. And it can only be maintained for a quarter of an hour at most." Yi Xian was shocked. 100,000 top-grade spirit stones? Only for a quarter of an hour? Are you kidding me? Mo Yuan smiled bitterly. "Although it is a bit expensive, the effect is excellent. If you have enough top-grade spirit stones, these 12 golden men can even kill an ordinary Dharma realm powerhouse." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled bitterly, and there was a trace of helplessness in his smile. He had more than 1 million top-grade spirit stones on him, and if he used them to activate the 12 golden men, he would run out in one go. Most importantly, it could only be maintained for a quarter of an hour. It was too short, too short. It was simply burning money. Although this thing was very good, he really didn't dare to use it casually. Using it once would make him poor. Mo Yuan said, "There is one more thing. The two of us can't help you openly. We have some grievances with us. If we help you, it might cause some trouble for you. So we can't help you openly. However, we can still help you in secret." Yi Xian smiled. "In that case, I will thank you in advance." Mo Yuan smiled lightly. "Mutual benefit." After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something and said, "Do you remember State Preceptor Liu?" Yi Xian nodded. "Of course." Mo Yuan said solemnly, "This person is the successor of military Tao. This time, the Great Cloud Empire is probably the opportunity she has been waiting for. As far as we know, the person she should choose is Her Highness the Ninth Princess. Since you have returned to the imperial capital, you can go look for her. Perhaps you will have a good harvest." Lu Jioga. Yi Xian nodded. "All right. Seniors, after I leave, I will trouble you two to take care of everything in Kanglin Academy." Mo Yuan gently stroked his beard. "It is my duty. You must be careful on your trip to Mizar City." Yi Xian slightly nodded and bid farewell to the two. Watching Yi Xian leave, Mo Yuan softly said, "He may be our only hope in Azure Firmament World." Feng Lan solemnly said, "Unfortunately, he has too many troubles." Karaki Academy, Dark World, Great Cloud Empire. Sigh. So annoying. Mo Yuan indifferently said. It doesn't matter. Although we can't openly take action, it doesn't mean we can't help him in other aspects. He is our only hope in Azure Firmament world. No matter what, we have to give it our all. Inside Kinglim Palace, Yi Xian, Jianji and Bai Zhe sat around the table. On the table, there were 4 dishes and a soup. After Yi Xian finished eating, he put the bowl on the table. I will leave with them tomorrow at noon. Bai Zhe said. I want to go with you. Jianji put down his chopsticks. Together. Yi Xian glanced at the two. When he was about to speak, Bai Zhe suddenly said, Bandit Yi, this is the last battle. Either we come back together, or we die together in Mizar City. Yi Xian was silent. Bai Zhe said again, Staying here is a kind of torture. Let us face everything together, okay? Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then nodded. All right, we will leave together tomorrow at noon. Bai Zhe grinned. Have another bowl, haha. Jianji glanced at Yi Xian, but did not speak. After dinner it was night time. Outside the palace, there was no moon or stars. The earth was dark. Yi Xian sat in front of the stone steps, a small wooden figure in his hand. Yi Ling. Yi Xian gently stroked the small wooden figure in his hand. His sister Yi Ling had been gone for some time. How was she doing? He was naturally worried. The divine central plains. Yi Xian's right hand slowly tightened around the small wooden figure. He had to work harder. Northern region of the divine central plains. Tens of thousands of kilometers in the northern region, it was cold all year round. Thousands of kilometers of ice and snow drifted down. In the center of the northern region, there was a palace, an ice palace. Inside the palace, countless women were gathered in front of an ice platform. A little girl sat cross-legged on the ice platform. She wasn't very old, only around the age of 13 or 14, and she seemed quite immature. Her hair was icy cold, and strands of formidable aura were ceaselessly emanating from her. However, this aura hadn't even spread out before it was obstructed by a thin barrier of ice. After an unknown period of time, the little girl's aura suddenly rose explosively, and it grew stronger and stronger to the point that the barrier of ice was on the verge of being unable to withstand it. The expressions of everyone here changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and they retreated in unison. A beautiful woman clenched her fists tightly while anxiety filled her eyes. Don't break through. You must not break through. It's not a good thing for you if you attain the Dharma realm right now. Suppress it, suppress it. The little girl's aura was still rising madly in the distance, and there was a small wooden figure in her hand. The kingdom of Jiang. Late at night. Yi Xian hadn't rested. He'd arrived at a bamboo forest outside the kingdom of Jiang instead. There was an exquisite bamboo house within the bamboo forest. The bamboo house was brightly lit with candles. Yi Xian arrived in front of the bamboo house, and the door suddenly opened. He was slightly startled, but he didn't think too much about it, and entered the bamboo house. Inside the bamboo house, Lu Joga was sitting in a wheelchair with a thick blanket covering her knees. She was holding a scroll in her hand. Seeing Yi Xian, Lu Joga smiled slightly. Long time no see. I'm ready. Can we go now? Yi Xian was stunned. You know why I'm here? Lu Joga smiled. Of course, Yi Xian said in a deep voice. You want to go with me? Lu Joga still had a smile on her face. Are you unwilling? Yi Xian walked in front of Lu Joga. Why? Lu Joga shook her head. I have no ill intentions towards you, nor towards the kingdom of Jiang. Is that enough? Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then nodded. Enough. Lu Joga's lips curled up slightly. Then let's go. Yi Xian asked. To Tsanglan Academy? Lu Joga shook her head. To Mizar City. Yi Xian said. We'll leave at daybreak. Lu Joga looked straight at Yi Xian. Leave now. Leave immediately. It'll be too late after daybreak. Yi Xian frowned. Why? Lu Joga pointed with a finger. A piece of paper flew in front of Yi Xian. When he saw the contents of the paper, Yi Xian's expression changed. He turned and left. There was only one line on the paper. The Black Flame Army has arrived. The Black Flame Army. Yi Xian had naturally heard of this army that caused the surrounding countries to turn pale at the mere mention of it. Jiang Jiao and the soldiers of Mizar City would definitely not be able to stop them. Not long after Yi Xian left, he suddenly stopped. He turned and walked back to the bamboo house. He walked in front of Lu Jioga. Why aren't you leaving? Lu Jioga said indifferently. Can I leave? Yi Xian, Lu Jioga said. Uncle Chen has gone to handle some matters for me. Now I'm alone. Yi Xian nodded. Understood. With that, he walked to Lu Jioga's side. He carried Lu Jioga and ran. After running out of the bamboo house, Yi Xian sprinted all the way. In his arms, Lu Jioga suddenly said, I asked you to push my wheelchair. I didn't ask you to carry me. Yi Xian was silent for a moment. Then he said, What did you say? The wind is strong. I didn't hear you clearly. Lu Jioga. Chapter 164. In the dark, Yi Xian carried Lu Jioga and ran wildly. The Black Flame Army. Yi Xian was naturally shocked when he heard the news. The Black Flame Army was one of the trump cards of the Great Cloud Empire. It was a cavalry army that the Great Cloud Empire nurtured with all its resources. These people were elites selected from various military camps. After being selected, the Great Cloud Empire would secretly nurture them. It could be said that the combat strength of these soldiers was extraordinarily terrifying. There was a saying in Qingzhou, who can compete with the Black Flame Army? Now that the Great Cloud Empire dispatched the Black Flame Army, it was obvious that they were blatantly trying to destroy the Jiang country. Yi Xian sped up and soon arrived at Azure Billow Academy with Lu Jioga. After handing Lu Jioga over to Jian, he immediately gathered the students of Azure Billow Academy. In front of Yi Xian, there were more than 40 students and 30 demonic beasts. The demonic beasts he brought from Mount Meng got along well with the students under Bai Zai's guidance. After all, these demonic beasts had their own intelligence. In front of the crowd, Yi Xian suddenly said, We might not return after this trip. Are you ready? Ready. The 40 people roared in unison. Yi Xian nodded. Let's go. Soon, Yi Xian and the rest rushed down Mount Jishuan and disappeared into the vast mountains. In the Jiang country's imperial palace, the monarch of the Jiang country, Jiang Yuan, stood in front of the main hall. He wore a golden armor and had a long saber at his waist. In front of him were 3,000 fully equipped royal guards. Jiang Yuan glanced at the soldiers. I've received news that the Black Flame Army of the Great Cloud Empire has arrived at Mizar City. Are you afraid? Black Flame Army. Everyone in the surroundings instantly glanced at each other when they heard this. Who in the entire Qingzhou didn't know about this army? Back then, they had destroyed a country with just 100 people. At this moment, Jiang Yuan said, Yi Guosher has led all the students of Azure Billow Academy to Mizar City. Yi Guosher. Hearing these 3 words, the crowd burst into an uproar. A soldier suddenly roared. With State Scholar Yi here, why should we be afraid of the Black Flame Army? We are willing to head to Mizar City and fight alongside State Scholar Yi. We are willing to go to Mizar City. In the battlefield, thousands of elite imperial guards roared in unison. Their voices rumbled like thunder and shook the clouds. At this moment, a cloud ship suddenly arrived above the Jiang country's imperial palace. Soon, the cloud ship slowly descended and landed not far away from everyone. Jiang Yuan unsheathed the saber at his waist. Board the ship. Several thousand soldiers boarded the cloud ship, and so did Jiang Yuan. Not long after, the cloud ship rose into the air. Jiang Yuan looked down from the cloud ship and looked at the familiar palace before him with a complicated expression. Because this might be the last time he would see the palace he had lived in for decades. In next to no time, the cloud ship vanished into the night. In the nurturing heart hall of the imperial palace of Jiang country, Jiang Yu sat on the ground. Beside him was a little black dog, and in front of him was the 5th-floor master of the Drunken Immortal Inn. Jiang Yu gently stroked the black puppy beside him. What are our chances of winning this battle? The 5th-floor master fell silent. Jiang Yu smiled. Please speak your mind. The 5th-floor master said, less than 20%. Jiang Yu asked softly, what if that Sword Immortal Senior joins the battle? The 5th-floor master turned to look outside the palace with a complicated expression. If she joins the battle, things will become even more complicated. Right now it was still a matter between the younger generation. Although it was already a national war, there were still no Dharma realm experts. This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page. If that sword immortal were to join the battle, it would mean that this was no longer a battle between the younger generation. At that time, the ones dying would no longer be ordinary people, but Dharma realm experts. The entire Azure province would be disrupted. And if she didn't join the battle, would Yi Xian and the rest be able to stop it? It would be difficult. Jiang Yu and the fifth floor master's eyes were filled with deep worry. The news of Azure Billow Academy's students and Jiang Yuan's imperial guards heading to Mizar City quickly spread throughout the Jiang country. Even the king had personally joined the battle. At this moment, everyone in the Jiang country was aware of the severity of the situation. It could be said that Mizar City was destroyed, and the Jiang country was doomed. In an instant, countless martial artists of the Jiang country spontaneously rushed to Mizar City. Some were afraid of death, but some were not. Some were unpatriotic, and some were patriotic. In a faraway mountain range, a group of cavalrymen ran wildly. Wherever they passed, the ground would burn with black flames. There were not many people in this group, only about 100 or so. These cavalrymen were all wearing dark golden armor and dark golden helmets. Their faces could not be seen because they were all wearing a ghost mask. Each of them held a dark golden spear in their hands. The spear was much longer than an ordinary spear, and its tip was extremely sharp. The tip of the spear was extremely thin, and it flickered with a cold flame. Each of them had a dark golden longbow slung across their shoulders, and each of them had a quiver on their backs. There were only 10 arrows in the quiver, and they were extremely long. The tips of the arrows were prismatic, and there were even hooks on them. Apart from that, on the left and right sides of each of their waists, there were 2 short sabers. They were shorter than ordinary sabers, but slightly longer than daggers. These equipment were all bright rank lower grade. All bright rank lower grade. In other words, each of their equipment alone was worth at least 1 billion gold coins. The most eye-catching thing was the horses they were riding on. These were not ordinary horses. These horses were much larger than ordinary horses. They were completely black, and there was a thick layer of dark scales on their ankles. Moreover, they were all wearing dark golden horse armor. When they ran, the ground beneath their feet would burn with black flames. This was because they were too fast. Black flame horse. This was a type of demonic beast that did not exist in the Qingzhou province. The Great Cloud Empire had spent a lot of money to purchase these demonic beasts from the Divine Central Continent. These demonic beasts were currently the fastest demonic beasts in the Qingzhou province. Once they started running, even a peak Divine Unity Realm expert would not be able to catch up. The Black Flame Army. This was an army that the Great Cloud Empire had spent countless resources to nurture. So far, they had never been defeated in the Qingzhou province. This time, they were going to conquer the Jiang country. Mizar City. At this moment, the entire Mizar City was in a state of emergency. Fortunately, the people were still calm. After all, the 9th princess of the Jiang country was here. This meant that the Jiang country did not want to give up this city, nor could they. Once this city was breached, the 100,000 soldiers of the Chu country would attack the imperial capital of the Jiang country in less than half a day. This was the last line of defense of the Jiang country. On the city wall, Jiang Jiu was still as valiant and formidable in her silver armor. However, there was an unconcealable look of exhaustion in her eyes. She had not rested since she arrived at Mizar City. Looking at the Chu country's army in the distance, Jiang Jiu's eyes were cold. She knew that the time for the decisive battle had arrived. This battle concerned her life and death, as well as the lives of countless people in the Jiang country. At this moment, Jiang Jiu's pupils suddenly constricted because the Chu country's cavalrymen in the distance had suddenly moved. They're here. Please continue to the next page. On the city wall, countless soldiers were on guard. The Chu country's cavalrymen did not charge. Instead, they slowly advanced toward Mizar City. When 100,000 cavalrymen advanced together, the entire ground began to tremble. Looking at the dense black army, the atmosphere on the entire city wall became heavy. Very soon, the Chu country's cavalrymen arrived at a distance of 10,000 feet from Mizar City. They stopped and did not send any infantry to attack the city, as if they were waiting for something. In front of this group of cavalrymen were Li Mu of Kuraki Academy and the mistress of the Dark World. Looking at Mizar City in the distance, Li Mu said indifferently, "In at most an hour, the Black Flame Army will arrive. At that time, with 100,000 troops, coupled with your Dao soldiers of the Dark World, it should be a piece of cake to take down this city." The mistress of the Dark World said in a low voice, "Then who will deal with Yi Xian?" Li Mu laughed coldly. "Don't worry. Other than Li Mulin and that archer, there is another person who has already rushed over from the Divine Central Plains. At that time, with the three of them attacking together and your Dao soldiers of the Dark World, it should not be difficult to kill him. Even if it is not enough, isn't there still 100,000 troops and the Black Flame Army? With so many people, can he still ascend to the heavens?" The mistress of the Dark World shook her head. "What if he escapes?" Li Mu smiled and said, "Don't worry, he will not escape." The mistress of the Dark World looked at Li Mu. Li Mu laughed coldly and said, "Although this person is a great enemy of Kuraki Academy, he is not someone who is afraid of death. And this person is very loyal. He will not escape. He definitely will not escape." His words were filled with confidence. The mistress of the Dark World said again, "What if that Sword Immortal attacks?" "Sword Immortal attacks?" Li Mu's eyes narrowed and his hands slowly clenched. "Sword Immortal attacks." Li Mu laughed coldly. "If she attacks, then she is the one who broke the rules first." At this point, his lips curled into a savage smile. "Then even kill her. It is just a price to pay." The mistress of the Dark World was silent. Price? The reason why Kuraki Academy and Dark World did not fight to the death with that Sword Immortal was because they wanted to leave a way out. Because if they fought to the death, everyone would be hurt at their foundations. Even though some people from Kuraki Academy and Dark World had died, this was only a small loss to them. Because core existences like 10,000 Dharma Realm did not die. As long as there were not too many experts of this level dying, they would not be hurt at their foundations. This was also the reason why they were willing to follow the rules set by the mysterious woman. For Dark World and Kuraki Academy, today's battle was also the last battle. In the battlefield, the two armies faced each other. But it was very quiet. Both sides were very quiet. On the city walls of Mizar City, countless soldiers were waiting. There was seriousness in their eyes, but more than that, there was determination. There was no way out. Since there was no way out, then naturally they had to fight. Jiang Jiu's expression was very calm. At this point, she had already thought of all the possible outcomes. The worst outcome was nothing more than death. At this moment, Li Mu suddenly looked to the right. A moment later, his lips curled up. "They are about to arrive. We can attack now." As his voice fell, an angry roar suddenly rang out from the 100,000 cavalry. "Attack! Attack!" In an instant, countless infantrymen charged out from the two sides of the cavalry towards Mizar City. On top of Mizar City, Jiang Jiu slowly closed her eyes. After a moment of silence, she suddenly opened her eyes and roared, "Fight to the death! Fight to the death!" On the city walls, countless people roared in unison. PS 2 chapters. These few days, the updates were not stable. Because I followed Lu Sun Academy to Guangzhou for an interview, I did not have the time to update. I hope everyone can understand. If not, come to Guangzhou and beat me up. Come on. End of this chapter. Chapter 165. A battle to the death. For all the soldiers on the city walls, this battle concerned their life and death. For the entire Jiang country, this battle concerned their survival. If they lost this battle, their country would perish. On the city walls, Jiang Jiu held a spear in her right hand with an expressionless face. Soon the Chu soldiers arrived at the city walls. Jiang Jiu took a step forward, waved his left hand and roared, "Fire!" As his voice fell, countless arrows poured down from the city walls like a torrential rain. In an instant, miserable screams rang out from below the city walls. But at this moment, many screams came from above the city walls. Jiang Jiu suddenly turned his head. At this moment, shadowy figures had appeared all over the city walls. They appeared quickly, and disappeared just as quickly. Every time they appeared, a soldier from the state of Jiang would fall to the ground. Dark World Dao soldiers. The sudden appearance of the assassins caused a wave of panic on the city walls. Seeing this scene, Jiang Jiu roared, "Don't panic. Death servants, move out." "Absolutely not." Beside Jiang Jiu, a general quickly said, "Your Highness, the death servants are responsible for your safety. They must not leave, Your Highness." Jiang Jiu turned to look at the general, her beautiful eyes filled with anger. "My life is a life, but the lives of the soldiers are not? All death servants, move out immediately." After a moment of silence, countless men in black holding daggers suddenly appeared on the city walls. Soon, these men in black flew around the city walls. The death servants of the Jiang country. This was a group of death servants that the Jiang country had meticulously nurtured. They were responsible for protecting the royal family. Although they were not as strong as the assassins from the Dark World, they were not weak either. With their numbers, they could still restrain the assassins from the Dark World. At this moment, Jiang Jiu suddenly turned to the wall and looked down. Not far away, a man holding a spear was running towards the city gates. First on the Qingzhou martial roll, Li Mulin. Li Mulin was extremely fast. He dodged left and right, easily dodging the arrows on the city walls. Seeing that Li Mulin's target was the city gates, Jiang Jiu's expression changed drastically. If the city walls were broken, the Jiang country soldiers would not be able to defend against the Chu country's army without the city walls to rely on. At this moment, Li Mulin suddenly stopped. With a shake of his right hand, he thrust his spear forward. Clang! At the tip of the spear was a flying dagger. The flying dagger spun violently as it pushed against the spear, causing sparks to fly. Li Mulin twisted his right hand, causing the spear in his hand to tremble violently. Bang! The saber was sent flying. Li Mulin raised his head and looked at the city wall. On the city wall, a man was also looking at him. Ink cloud rise. Mo Yunqi stood on the city wall, looking down at Li Mulin with an expressionless face. In his right palm, there was a flying dagger. The dagger was only 3 inches long, and the tip of the dagger emitted a piercing cold light. Below the city wall, Li Mulin retracted his gaze and continued forward. However, just as he took a step forward, a flying dagger suddenly flew out from the city wall, as fast as lightning. The next moment, a cold light appeared in front of Li Mulin. Li Mulin's reaction was extremely fast. The moment the flying knife flew out, the spear in his hand had already stabbed out. Bang! A flying knife was sent flying. After sending the flying dagger flying with one strike, Li Mulin suddenly leaped and arrived in front of the city gate. Countless soldiers of Chu parted to the sides. Li Mulin increased his speed as he gathered a powerful force around his body. Spear force. At this moment he raised his power to the limit. This spear would definitely break the city gate. Seeing this scene, Mo Yunqi, who was on the city wall, revealed a sinister smile. Without the slightest hesitation, he leaped and fiercely smashed down from the city wall with a large metal rod in his hand. Li Mulin did not care about Mo Yunqi, because he felt that his speed was faster, and he could break the city the moment Mo Yunqi landed. However, he underestimated Mo Yunqi's speed. The moment he jumped off the city wall, Mo Yunqi's speed suddenly increased. Feeling Mo Yunqi's speed increase, Li Mulin's expression changed drastically. The spear in his hand that was originally going to stab towards the city gate changed its trajectory and blocked upwards. Bang! Following a heavy sound of impact, Li Mulin was already 10 feet away. He had just stopped when suddenly, a flying dagger appeared in front of him without any warning. Too fast. Li Mulin's pupils constricted slightly, and he dodged to the side. The flying dagger passed by his nose. In the next moment, he suddenly turned around and stabbed out with his spear. The spear was like a dragon, and a cold light appeared. This spear directly stabbed the metal rod that was smashing towards him. The spear and rod shook violently, and Mo Yunqi retreated explosively by over 30 m. Mo Yunqi had just stopped when the ground beneath his feet directly collapsed. At the same time, the web between his thumb and forefinger had split open, and fresh blood flowed out and slowly flowed down the metal rod. Li Mulin glanced at the distant Mo Yunqi, and then he tapped the tip of his foot lightly before his figure suddenly shot out explosively. In the next moment, a sharp sound of something tearing resounded. Li Mulin stopped because the spear in his hand had stabbed empty air. He raised his head and looked towards the distance, and Mo Yunqi had suddenly retreated to the city gate. What swift speed! Li Mulin's eyes carried a trace of seriousness, because Mo Yunqi's speed was truly too swift. Swift to the point it exceeded his expectations. Mo Yunqi didn't attack. He glanced at the surroundings, and there were already scaling ladders set up all around him. Countless soldiers were charging up the city walls like madmen, whereas some people didn't need scaling ladders at all. All of these people had attained the hovering realm, and they could rely on the walls to fly up the city walls. The sounds of battle had already resounded from the top of the city walls. Now, if even the city gates were breached, then Mizar city would really be finished. Because once the 100,000 cavalrymen from the Chu kingdom were allowed to charge into the city, then the soldiers within the city would be utterly unable to stop these cavalrymen. The city couldn't be breached. Mo Yunqi held the iron rod tightly in his right hand. As soon as he exerted force, his wound split open once more, and even more blood flowed out. Mo Yunqi stared fixedly at the distant Li Mulin. Looks like I have to fucking be a hero for once. Meanwhile, Li Mulin suddenly vanished on the spot. Mo Yunqi's expression became ferocious. He could flee, but this time, he couldn't flee because the city gates were right behind him. Mo Yunqi's figure suddenly soared into the sky, and his figure started spinning like a top in midair. In an instant, countless rod images flashed into appearance. Meanwhile, Li Mulin arrived with his spear in hand, and he pointed it straight at Mo Yunqi. His spear strike carried the might of a thunderbolt. In midair, Mo Yunqi suddenly roared furiously, "Rod technique!" As soon as his voice resounded, the rod smashed down, and behind the rod were countless overlapping rod images. Rod technique. This was the rod technique that Old Man Ji had passed down to him. As soon as the spear and rod collided, bang! An ear-piercing sound of a heavy strike suddenly resounded. Mo Yunqi's entire body flew out, and finally landed heavily on the city gates not far away. The city gates trembled violently, and he smashed into the ground, causing the ground to instantly crack. As for Li Mulin, he also retreated explosively, and this time, he retreated more than 100 feet. In front of him, there was 100-feet-long ravine. This was the result of him retreating with his feet. It was rubbed raw. Mo Yunqi slowly crawled up. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and then raised his head to look at Li Mulin, who was not far away. The latter was also looking at him. Mo Yunqi grinned. "Mother f***, come at me." Li Mulin's eyes narrowed slightly, and just as he was about to make another move, a figure suddenly sprinted over from behind him. Li Mulin turned around to look. It was a man who was around the age of 20, and he wore tight-fitting plain clothes. His long hair was coiled around his neck, and his gaze was icy cold. Moreover, he held a large saber in his right hand. The body of the saber was wide, and its blade was extremely thin. There were 5 black iron rings tied to the back of the saber, and the hilt of the saber was covered in numerous markings. These markings emanated strands of light red light, and they coiled around the man's right hand. The man just charged towards the city gates with the saber in hand. Everywhere he passed, the ground that the saber came into contact with collapsed inch by inch, and a monstrous aura assaulted the face. The soldiers in the surroundings retreated in unison, and didn't dare approach him. How formidable! Li Mulin's pupils constricted slightly when he saw this person, and his eyes were filled with a solemn expression. He's from the Central Divine Prefecture. Mo Yunqi stared fixedly at the man who was charging towards him. Actually, he wanted to flee in his heart, because he'd suffered a heavy injury when he fought Li Mulin head-on just now. Now, when he saw the aura of the man with the saber, he was very clearly aware that he was unable to resist the man. If he resisted it head-on, then it was very likely that he would die. Mo Yunqi suddenly roared furiously. "Flee my ass. I'm fucking from Darkwave Academy. I'm Bandit Ye's brother. I can't fucking lose face. Come fight me." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground, and then he held the black rod with both hands as he charged towards the man. Profound energy surged madly within Emo Yunqi's body, and countless strands of profound energy surged like tidewater into the black rod in his hand. At this moment, the aura of the rod had converged within his body as well. However, the aura of his rod was extremely inferior to the aura of the man with the saber. However, there wasn't a trace of fear in Emo Yunqi's eyes, and his speed grew faster and faster. Just like that, the two of them grew closer and closer under the gazes of countless people. 15M, 10M, 6M, 3M. The man with the saber slashed down. Emo Yunqi held the rod with both hands as he smashed it down. A moment of silence ensued. Hiss! The long rod instantly shattered, and the saber slashed straight towards Emo Yunqi's head. Emo Yunqi's pupils constricted, and his figure flashed backwards, dodging this fatal strike by a hair's breadth. The saber directly sank into the ground, but the next moment, the man with the saber suddenly let go of the saber, and then he charged forward, and directly kneed Emo Yunqi in the abdomen. Emo Yunqi's eyes widened, and his entire body was sent flying backwards. This time, he flew for a distance of a few hundred feet, and finally smashed heavily onto the city gate of Mizar City in the distance. Bang! The city gate shook violently, and then, Emo Yunqi smashed onto the ground, and countless clouds of dust rose. Not far away, the man with the saber opened his right hand, and the saber behind him suddenly flew up, and then appeared in his hand. The man carried the saber, and walked towards Emo Yunqi, who was at the city wall. Emo Yunqi crawled up, and blood flowed continuously from the corner of his mouth, and his body was in a tearing pain. Emo Yunqi stared at the man with the saber, who was walking towards him from afar, and he wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Damn it, Bandit Yi. Don't tell me you're waiting for me to die before coming. As he spoke, he looked around, and did not see Yi Xian's figure. The man in the distance was getting closer and closer. The corner of Emo Yunqi's mouth twitched. Bandit Yi. Brother Yi. Big brother. Dear brother. Save me. I really don't want to die. Genius 1 second to remember website. Mobile version website. Chapter 166. Afraid of death? Who wasn't afraid of death? Not to mention Emo Yunqi. Even Yi Xian was afraid of death. Or rather, he didn't want to die. In this world, there were too many things to worry about, and too many wonderful things. If one could live, who would want to die? But if he had to die, then there was nothing he could do. Just like this moment. Emo Yunqi could originally escape, but he didn't choose to escape. His thoughts were to block for as long as he could, and try to buy as much time as possible for Yi Xian. Because once the city was breached, the cavalry would charge, and at that time, it would be a destructive matter for Mizar City. Emo Yunqi wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His expression turned malevolent as he walked towards the man with the big saber. The saber-wielding man's figure suddenly trembled. In the next moment, he appeared directly above Emo Yunqi's head. In the blink of an eye, his saber slashed down at Emo Yunqi. As the saber fell, an ear-piercing tearing sound rang out. Emo Yunqi's eyes were cold. He didn't block the saber. Instead, he opened his right hand, and a flying saber flew out from his palm. Block the knife? He knew very well that he couldn't block it anymore. Thus he chose to exchange a life for a life. If it really didn't work out, he would settle for the next best thing. Exchanging a life for an injury was also fine. That was all he could do. Just as the saber was about 10 centimeters away from Emo Yun's head, it suddenly stopped. This was because a sword was firmly pressed against the blade of the saber. This sword had blocked all of the saber's power. As for Emo Yunqi's flying knife, it was unable to cut into the man's abdomen. Underneath the man's clothes was a pitch-black armor. This armor forcefully blocked the flying knife. The man wielding the saber pressed forward with his right hand. Bang! The sword was sent flying, but in the next moment it flew back again. The saber-wielding man frowned. Holding the saber forward was everything. Bang! The sword was sent flying again, but the saber-wielding man was also forced back a good 100 feet. The man raised his head and looked into the distance. There a man was slowly walking over. Yi Xian. The moment she saw Yi Xian, all the soldiers on the city wall were in an uproar, and countless angry roars resounded from the city wall. Morale skyrocketed. On the other hand, when Jiang Jiu, who was in battle, saw Yi Xian, a wisp of a smile appeared on his bloodied face. Here it comes. He came. Accompanying Yi Xian were Ji Anji, Bai Zhe, and all the students of Conglan Academy. These students had already rushed up the city walls, and were fighting with the soaring sky realm experts of Chu country. Ordinary soldiers might not be able to defeat these high sky realm experts, but Conglan Academy students were not afraid. Among them, the weakest was at the high sky realm. On the other side, when the two of them saw Yi Xian, the corners of Li Mu's mouth curled up into a cold smile. You finally appeared? Before Yi Xian did not appear, he was still a little worried. He was not worried that Yi Xian would escape, but he was worried that Yi Xian would do something else. Beside him, the mistress of the world asked, "Attack?" Li Mu shook his head. "Let your men check the surroundings first. This person isn't stupid. He might have a backup plan. No matter what, it's best for us to be careful." The mistress of the dark world nodded and left. Li Mu looked at Yi Xian, who was not far away. His eyes were filled with coldness and killing intent. In order to deal with Yi Xian, Conglan Academy had paid a huge price. This time, if they did not succeed, they would die trying. Yi Xian walked to Mo Yunqi's side. Mo Yunqi collapsed. Yi Xian supported Mo Yunqi and placed a golden sword pill into Mo Yunqi's mouth. Mo Yunqi looked at Yi Xian. "If you came a little later, we can only be brothers in our next life." Yi Xian patted Mo Yunqi's shoulder and said softly, "Leave the rest to me." After that, he sent Mo Yunqi to Bai Zhe, who was on the city wall. Then he turned around and pointed. Chi. A few dozen feet away, a dark world Dao soldier's head was instantly pierced by this sword light. In the next moment, the sword light flashed like a bolt of lightning. This chapter is not over, please flip the page. After that, a few dozen feet away, the heads of 5 to 6 Chu country soldiers flew off. Fresh blood sprayed out like a fountain. Instant kill. Yi Xian's flying sword was too fast. The Dark World Dao soldiers, and Chu country's Levitation Realm soldiers, could not stop his flying sword at all. Soon, the soldiers fled from the city wall. Soon, there were only Jiang country's soldiers left on the city wall. Below, the Chu country's soldiers who were attacking the city also retreated for some reason. They retreated very quickly. In less than 15 minutes, they all retreated, leaving behind a ground full of corpses. The city wall was also covered with corpses. The place was filled with the pungent smell of blood. In the distance, Li Mu suddenly came to the city wall. On his left was the man with the big saber. The man was expressionless. The big saber in his hand kept spinning. Every time it spun, there would be waves of saber light. On Li Mu's right was Li Mulan. Apart from that, there was a man with a longbow behind him. He was also a monster from Qingzhou. Li Mu arrived at the city wall. He looked up at Yi Xian, and he sneered, "Yi Xian you." Yi Xian suddenly leaped down from the city wall. After he arrived on the ground, he walked over to Li Mu and looked him in the eyes. "Shut up. I don't want to hear it." As he spoke, he looked at the man with the big saber by Li Mu's side. "You hit my brother? Who gave you the gall to do that?" As soon as he finished speaking, he pointed at the man with the big saber, and a sword flew out from within him. In the distance, the man's eyes narrowed slightly. He took a step forward with his saber in hand, and then he suddenly slashed down. Bang! The saber trembled violently, and he retreated explosively. Meanwhile, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. The man's pupils constricted, and he slashed forward with his saber again. The force of the saber was peerlessly overbearing. Meanwhile, Yi Xian's sword stabbed the saber. It was just a simple stab, but the sword contained an extremely powerful force. Bang! As an ear-piercing sound of metal colliding resounded, the man with the big saber instantly retreated over 30 m. As soon as he stopped, a flying sword had already slashed towards him, and he raised his saber to block it. Bang! The saber shook violently, and the man and his saber were pushed back over 30 m again. At this moment, 2 deep cuts had appeared between the man's thumb and index finger, and blood was flowing out. The man raised his head to look at Yi Xian, and in the next moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished. One sword strike to decide life and death. When he felt how terrifying this sword strike was, the man's expression changed drastically. At this moment, he didn't dare to hold back at all. He held the saber with both hands and spun on the spot. In an instant, countless saber lights shook and instantly drowned Yi Xian and his sword strike. After a moment of silence, a ray of sword light suddenly erupted from within the saber lights. Bang! The saber lights were instantly shattered, and the powerful force instantly shook the man with the big saber and forced him to retreat repeatedly. However, he hadn't even taken a few steps back when a sword was pressed against the center of his forehead. Flying sword. Yi Xian was still a few meters away from the man with the big saber, but the sword was already pressed against the man's forehead. At this moment, his sword control technique had already reached an extremely terrifying level. Yi Xian slowly walked towards the man with the big saber. "You think my brother is someone you can bully?" As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand. The exquisite spirit sword pierced through the man's forehead. Pust! A stream of blood splattered from the back of the man's head. Seeing this scene, everyone's expression changed drastically, especially Li Mu, who was nearby. At this moment his eyes were filled with shock, because he realized that Yi Xian's strength was much stronger than before. How long had it been? Was he a devil? Li Mu looked at Yi Xian, and at this moment he finally panicked. The speed at which Yi Xian's strength grew was way too fast. He had to admit that if this continued, Yi Xian might become a sword master within 3 years, or even less. This was too terrifying. Thinking to this point, this chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. Because Li Mu was even more determined in his thoughts. Yi Xian must die. At this time sue for peace? That was something that was simply impossible. Li Mu looked at the mistress of the dark world beside him. Be ready. The mistress of the dark world nodded slightly and disappeared silently. In the distance, Yi Xian walked to the man's corpse, and with a wave of his right hand, the machete on the ground appeared in his hand. High-grade clear-grade spirit weapon. This machete could be sold for at least 150 million gold coins, maybe even more. The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up slightly. This was not a small amount of wealth. Although it wasn't a sword, he could use it to exchange for a clear-grade sword. After putting away the machete, he waved his right hand, and the storage ring on the man's finger flew into his hand. In the storage ring, there were more than 100 million gold coins, more than 200,000 top-grade spirit stones, and a lot of miscellaneous things. Although there weren't many good things, they weren't too bad either, and could be exchanged for more than 10 million gold coins. Yi Xian put away the storage ring and looked at the corpse on the ground. The more monstrous a person was, the more wealth he had on him. On second thought, if someone killed him, the other party could also obtain a large amount of wealth. In this cruel world, killing and robbing was always the fastest way to get rich. As if he thought of something, Yi Xian turned to look at Li Mulin, who was not far away. Li Mulin squinted his eyes, and his right hand tightly held onto the spear. Yi Xian slowly walked towards Li Mulin, and Li Mulin stared at Yi Xian. I will leave and never step into the country of Jiang again. Yi Xian stopped, and Li Mulin said again, I didn't kill your friend. As he spoke, he flicked his finger, and a storage ring flew to Yi Xian. Yi Xian glanced at it, and there were 200 million gold coins in it. 200 million. Li Mulin looked at Yi Xian. I only came here to seek wealth, and I have no enmity with you. This storage ring will end all the grievances between us. How about it? Yi Xian asked, Why? Li Mulin said, It's not worth it, and it's not too late to retreat now. Of course it's up to you. Yi Xian put away the storage ring. Let's go. In fact, if Li Mulin escaped into the Chu army, he couldn't do anything to him. After all, he hadn't reached the level of fighting an army of 100,000 by himself. Li Mulin did this to end the grievances, and he didn't want him to protect Li Mulin and his family in the future. Just as Li Mulin said, he wanted to end all the grievances. Li Mulin took a deep glance at Yi Xian, and then he turned around and left. Nearby, Li Mu suddenly ridiculed. The dignified young master of the #1 clan in Pine Prefecture actually admitted defeat just like that? Li Mulin glanced at Li Mu. Admitted defeat? Yes, I admitted defeat. I just couldn't defeat him. There's nothing bad about recognizing your own strength. As soon as he finished speaking, the spear in his hand suddenly trembled violently, and then it howled. Li Mu's expression instantly became unsightly when he saw this. A breakthrough in his mental state. Li Mulin was stunned, and then he roared with laughter in the next moment. So that's how it is. So that's how it is. Haha. Yi Xian, when we meet again in the Central Divine Prefecture, I'll definitely fight you. As soon as he finished speaking, he'd vanished into the distance. Li Mulin. Yi Xian fell silent. There were always many geniuses and monstrous geniuses in this world. Perhaps he would be a completely different person the next time they met. Right at this moment, the ground suddenly started trembling. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned. A moment later, they looked towards the distance, and they saw a group of cavalrymen galloping swiftly towards them. Everywhere they passed, the ground was covered in black flames. The Black Flame Army. The countenances of all the soldiers in Mizar City instantly turned pale when they witnessed this scene. Who could fight against the Black Flame Army? P.S. I didn't have any time to write in the last 2 days. I've been observing and learning, and I even had to write a summary. I'm truly sorry. I haven't been updating well in the last few days, and I'm very sorry for that. I don't ask for your understanding. I just ask for your monthly votes. Thank you. Lastly, I'll allow all of you to curse me for the next few days. Right, we're all civilized people, so you can't curse me with vulgarities. Whoever curses is a puppy. End of this chapter. Chapter 167. Black Flame Army. This was a mysterious army that had countless legends in Qingzhou. At this moment, it was no longer a legend. It had truly appeared before everyone's eyes. Everyone was looking at this cavalry unit. Yi Xian was also looking at this cavalry unit. He had to admit that this cavalry unit was indeed very strong. They were even stronger than the Dao soldiers from Kuraki Academy that he had encountered previously. This cavalry unit was filled with a murderous aura. They were unstoppable. That was the feeling they gave off. Very strong. Truly very strong. At this moment, all the soldiers of the state of Jiang had turned pale. Many of their eyes were filled with fear. At the sight of this, Jiang Zhou's face instantly darkened. What was the most important thing for an army? It was the morale of the army. If they lost their morale before the battle began, they might collapse once the battle began. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly charged towards the Black Flame Army. At this moment, Yi Xian attracted everyone's attention. What is he doing? That was what everyone was thinking at this moment. Jiang Zhou clenched her fists tightly as she stared at Yi Xian. Her mind was completely blank. Just like that, under countless gazes, Yi Xian's speed increased as he held the spirit-elegant sword in his right hand. Battle intent. Torrential battle intent radiated from Yi Xian's body. Battle intent. Yi Xian's thoughts were very simple. He wanted to fight. Could he win? Couldn't win? He didn't think too much about it. Young people needed to be hot-blooded, to be aggressive, and to fight. If he couldn't win, he would run. Yi Xian's speed increased as his battle intent grew stronger. The Black Flame Army in front of him didn't stop either. Not only did they not stop, but they also increased their speed. 1 person against 100. It was something that seemed impossible, but it was happening right now. Everyone was looking at Yi Xian, who was charging towards the Black Flame Army. Under everyone's gazes, both sides were getting closer and closer. 10 zhang. 15 zhang. 10 zhang. Yi Xian suddenly leaped, and in the next moment, he swung his sword at a Black Flame cavalryman. One sword to decide life and death. As the sword slashed down, a sword cry resounded. The Black Flame cavalryman stabbed with his spear. This stab didn't have any fancy movements and was extremely simple. The spear and sword collided. Bang! Beneath the two of them, the earth trembled, and the long spear in the hands of the Black Flame cavalryman instantly shattered. Yi Xian's sword slashed down in a straight line, directly on the head of the cavalryman. Bang! The cavalryman was instantly sent flying. This time, he flew for more than 100 feet, before finally crashing heavily onto the ground. After landing on the ground, he had just stood up when he instantly collapsed. Soon, blood flowed out from under his mask. Under the armor, the cavalryman's body had already cracked. However, the helmet was not destroyed. There was only a deep sword mark on it. After Yi Xian sent the cavalryman flying with his sword, he did not choose to continue fighting. Instead, after landing on the ground, he lightly pushed off with the tip of his foot and floated backwards. His speed was very fast, and in the blink of an eye, he had already returned to the city wall. After a moment of silence, a series of furious roars suddenly burst out from Mizar City. This chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. State Scholar Yi. State Scholar Yi. Countless people roared in unison. At this moment, the morale of the soldiers of the state of Jiang, who had already fallen to rock bottom, instantly skyrocketed. Jiang Jiu glanced at Yi Xian, and her beautiful eyes were filled with splendor. Before this, if no one stood out, the state of Jiang could be said to have been defeated without a fight. Because before the battle even started, the morale of the soldiers of the state of Jiang was already completely gone. Under such circumstances, how could they fight? Fortunately, Yi Xian stood out. Yi Xian used his strength to tell all the soldiers of the state of Jiang that the Black Flame Army was not that powerful. On the city wall, countless soldiers of the state of Jiang were in high spirits, and their eyes were filled with excitement. On the other hand, Yi Xian's expression was solemn. At this moment, he already knew the strength of the Black Flame Army. If it wasn't for the single sword determines life and death, he might not have been able to kill them. The strength of these people was secondary. The most important thing was their equipment. Their equipment was too good, and the helmet of the soldier of the Black Flame Army had actually withstood his sword. After all, his sword was a real sword. If he had to put in so much effort to kill them, if the Black Flame Army entered Mizar City, how could the soldiers of the state of Jiang defend Mizar City? They couldn't. Yi Xian slowly clenched the spirit elegant sword in his right hand. Even if he had to expose his trump card, he couldn't let the soldiers of the state of Jiang face the Black Flame Army. At this moment, not far from the city, Li Mu suddenly said, "Yi Xian, today is the day you die." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned to look at the soldiers of the state of Chu. When the city is breached, you can do whatever you want after entering the city. Do whatever you want. Hearing this, countless soldiers of the state of Chu were instantly excited. This meant that after they entered the city, they could do whatever they wanted. Li Mu suddenly turned to look at Mizar City. Attack! As soon as he finished speaking, countless soldiers of the state of Chu surged towards Mizar City like a tidal wave. At the same time, close to 30 ghostly figures in black suddenly appeared among the soldiers. Dark World Dao soldiers. On the city wall, Jiang Jiu took a step forward. Fight to the death! Fight to the death! On the city wall, countless soldiers roared in unison. The battle had begun. Countless arrows rained down like a torrential storm. Below the city wall, there were more and more corpses. However, some of the state of Chu's High Sky Realm soldiers managed to ascend the city wall. Apart from them, there were also dozens of Dark World Dao soldiers. When these Dao soldiers charged up the city wall, the ordinary soldiers of the state of Jiang couldn't stop them. Even the death servants that the state of Jiang nurtured couldn't stop them. They weren't on the same level. Beside Yi Xian, Bai Zai and Jianji had already charged out. Yi Xian didn't make a move. His attention was on the Black Flame Army below. The Black Flame Army hadn't made a move yet. At this moment, several figures charged towards the city gate of Mizar City. The speed of these figures was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they arrived before the city gate. However, in the next moment, a ray of sword light appeared at the city gate. The few figures retreated at the same time. In front of the city gate, Yi Xian appeared out of nowhere. Not far away from him stood 3 black-robed figures. The 3 of them didn't choose to fight with Yi Xian. Instead, they retreated. From Yi Xian's previous attack, they were very clear that ordinary people weren't a match for Yi Xian. They wouldn't make any unnecessary sacrifices. Yi Xian looked at Li Mu, who wasn't far away. Li Mu sneered and tilted his head. "It's your turn." As soon as Li Mu's voice fell, a woman suddenly walked out from the group of soldiers. The woman wore a long robe. If this chapter hasn't ended, please flip the page. She wore a long white dress that trailed the ground. There were 3 blood-red plum blossoms on it. In her hands, she held an emerald-green pipa. The woman's appearance couldn't be considered to be devastatingly beautiful. However, she was very pleasing to the eye. She slowly walked towards Yixian. As she sized up Yixian, there was a trace of astonishment in her beautiful eyes. Other than in Lanxiu, I never thought that there would be a genius like you in the Green Province. What a surprise! Yixian slowly walked towards the woman. How about this? Do me a favor. If you leave, I'll return the favor in the future. What do you say? The woman shook her head. She slowly walked towards Yixian. They paid me 10 million supreme-grade spirit stones to restrain you. If I can kill you, it'll be 50 million. May I ask weakly, is your favor worth 50 million? Yixian shrugged his shoulders. There's nothing to talk about. As soon as his voice fell, he disappeared from the spot. The woman's lips curled up. Her jade-like fingers lightly plucked the strings of the pipa. Wang! The sound of the pipa was like a sudden clap of thunder. Hundreds of soldiers who were closer to the woman instantly bled from their 7 orifices and fell to the ground. As for Yixian himself, he retreated to the city gates of Mizar City in an instant. Just as he stopped, fresh blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. The Lingxiu sword in his hand was also vibrating violently. Yixian lifted his head to look at the woman. The woman smiled gently. Let me introduce myself. I'm Jiang Zhiga from the Heavenly Sound sect. In front of thousands of soldiers, I stopped them with my pipa. I'm currently ranked 11th on the demon ranking. However, I'll be in the top 10 soon. As she spoke, she smiled faintly. In the next instant, her jade-like fingers plucked the strings of the pipa. In an instant, a string sound reverberated. This string sound couldn't be seen. However, the ground in front of her started to crack inch by inch, all the way to the front of Yixian. Yixian was expressionless. He tilted his head slightly and stabbed out with his sword. At the tip of the sword, a cold gleam appeared. Tsk. Yixian's body trembled violently. The ground beneath his feet started to crack inch by inch. Moreover, the cracks spread rapidly in all directions. In an instant, the city walls on both sides behind him had many cracks. At this moment, Jiang Zhiga suddenly took a step forward. She walked gracefully, and her jade-like fingers plucked one of the strings of the pipa. In an instant, the crisp and melodious sound of the pipa rang out. The sound was pleasant to the ears. However, to Yixian, it was undoubtedly a death sentence. He knew that he had met a true expert. At this moment, he didn't dare to conceal his strength. He took a step forward and stabbed out with his sword. Boom! The string from before shattered instantly. Immediately after, he took another step forward and stabbed out with another arrow. The momentum of the sword was like a tsunami that was tens of thousands of feet high. It was unstoppable. Tsk. As the tip of Yixian's sword stabbed out, a sharp and ear-piercing tearing sound resounded. At this moment, his hand started to tremble violently. However, he destroyed this string sound. At this moment, Jiang Zhiga was stunned. It wasn't just her, even Li Mu was stunned. Sword Master? Li Mu's mind went blank, and he stared blankly at Yixian. That strike just now had obviously reached the level of a sword master. Moreover, the sword intent was quite strange. Sword Master? Li Mu's right hand was trembling slightly. He looked at Yixian with eyes filled with disbelief. You've actually reached the level of a sword master. Yixian nodded and said seriously. I hid it on purpose to give you a surprise. A surprise? Are you surprised? Hee. Pooh. Li Mu suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. End of this chapter. Chapter 168. Surprise? It was more like shock. Li Mu had never imagined that Yixian had reached the level of a sword master. A sword master and a sword Dao grandmaster were two completely different concepts. A sword Dao grandmaster was popular in Azure Province, but in the Divine Central Continent, it was only above average. But a sword master was a completely different story. With Yixian's current strength, he was fully qualified to be on the demon-level geniuses list, and he could even make it to the top 10. Which one of the top 10 on the demon-level geniuses list wasn't a heaven-defying genius? Li Mu clenched his fists, shocked and furious. At this moment, Jiang Zhiga, who sat opposite Yixian, suddenly said softly, "Swordmaster." As she spoke, she put away her pipa. "I think I can do you a favor." "Yi Xian." Jiang Zhiga sized up Yi Xian. "Remember, you owe me a favor. When you come to the divine central continent in the future, remember to return the favor." With that, she turned to leave with her pipa in her arms. But when she passed by Li Mu, she suddenly stopped and glanced at him. "I'm a little embarrassed about this. Right, to express my apology, I'll take 9 million top-grade spirit stones from you. Pay up." As she spoke, she stretched out her right hand. Li Mu said angrily, "You're leaving, and you still want money? What kind of logic is that?" Jiang Zhiga frowned slightly. "How arduous was my journey from the divine central continent to here? I'm only asking you to pay for your labor. What, you're not willing?" Li Mu was furious. "You used the transportation array to come here. How arduous was it? The old man will tell you that if you want 10 million top-grade spirit stones, you can restrain him, and the old man will hand over the top-grade spirit stones with both hands. Otherwise," Jiang Zhiga's eyes narrowed slightly, "otherwise you'll hit me?" As she spoke, she took a step forward and looked straight at Li Mu. "What? You think you're so great, because you're at a high level? Just try and touch me." Li Mu was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. Hit Jiang Zhiga? He really wanted to, but he couldn't. Jiang Zhiga was ranked 11th on the monster list. Most importantly, the Heavenly Sound sect behind her was a force that was much stronger than Karaki Academy. This fight was definitely poking a hornet's nest. Jiang Zhiga suddenly said indifferently, "Humph. It doesn't matter if you don't give it to me. I'll return to the Central Divine Prefecture right now and challenge Karaki Academy to a life-and-death battle." With that, she turned around and left. A challenge to the death. Li Mu's expression immediately changed. No one in Karaki Academy could beat this woman. If this woman went to Karaki Academy, she would be a complete bully. Most importantly, it was very likely that Karaki Academy would become enemies with the Heavenly Sound sect. Li Mu suddenly flicked his finger, and a storage ring flew over to Jiang Zhiga. Jiang Zhiga stopped in her tracks and glanced at the storage ring. In the next moment, she put the storage ring away and turned around to smile at Li Mu. "Senior, it's been a pleasure working with you." As she spoke, she glanced at Yi Xian. "Swordsman, remember, you owe me a favor, don't forget it." With that, she turned around and vanished swiftly into the distance. Yi Xian shook his head. "I've never seen such a shameless person." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot. Hiss! 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 3 flying swords suddenly flew out from his body, and the heads of 3 Dark Dimension Dao soldiers on the city wall were instantly chopped off. Since he'd exposed his trump card, he naturally wouldn't suppress his strength. Li Mu's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he roared furiously in the next moment. "Kill! Kill them all! Kill!" At this moment, he couldn't be bothered about all that. Yi Xian had attained the Sword Master realm. It was undoubtedly a bolt out of the blue to him and Karaki Academy. They absolutely couldn't allow Yi Xian to live. Because if Yi Xian headed to the Central Divine Prefecture, then with his current strength and natural talent, there would definitely be powers that would be willing to accept him. And there would definitely be quite a few of them. If a Grandmaster in the Sword Dao wasn't sufficient to make the powers of the Central Divine Prefecture become enemies with Karaki Academy and the Dark Dimension, then a Sword Master was absolutely sufficient. If it was said that he was only afraid of Yi Xian in the past, then it wasn't just fear now, it was terror. The speed of Yi Xian's growth was truly too terrifying. As soon as Li Mu finished speaking, the soldiers of Chu in the surroundings charged forward, and even the cavalry had started charging. Yi Xian frowned when he saw the cavalry charge. The city gate hasn't been breached, yet the cavalry is charging? Right at this moment, the city gate of Mizar City exploded into pieces. It had come without the slightest sign. Everyone on the city wall was stunned. How did it break through? Jiang Jiu swiftly turned to look at Li Mu, who stood below the city wall. Li Mu's expression was calm, while his eyes contained ghastly killing intent. It was he who'd attacked just now. On the city wall, Yi Xian faced Li Mu. He hadn't expected that Li Mu would actually attack. But Li Mu was an expert above the Dharma realm. Li Mu was taking a risk. Or it could be said that he was already driven to desperation. At this moment, 100,000 cavalry had already charged over. That battle array seemed as if they wanted to destroy the entire Mizar city. Yi Xian suddenly jumped off the city wall. He stood right in front of the city gate and felt the army charging over. Yi Xian's breathing stopped. The momentum of the army wasn't something that he could withstand with his current strength. If it was any other time, he would turn around and run without hesitation. But now he couldn't run. Behind him was Jiang Jiu, Imo Yunqi, Baizhe, Azure Billow Academy, and thousands upon thousands of people of the state of Jiang. The responsibility on his shoulders was heavy. I can't retreat. The moment this thought appeared, the sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly trembled violently. Immediately after, a surge of sword intent emitted from his body. Around Yi Xian's body, a white mist that resembled light smoke was emitted. It wasn't white mist, it was similar to white mist. Sword intent materialized. Seeing this scene, Li Mu, who was far away, was already completely stunned. Sword intent materialized. Wasn't this something that only the Sword Emperor could achieve? Sword Emperor? What's wrong with this world? Li Mu's mind went blank once again, as if he had been struck by lightning. Sword Emperor? In fact, Yi Xian hadn't reached the Sword Emperor level yet. Sword intent materialized was a manifestation of the Sword Emperor. But it didn't mean that he was definitely the Sword Emperor. To become the Sword Emperor, one's state of mind, Sword Dao attainment, and understanding of the sword were all indispensable. But his current sword intent materialized had nothing to do with his realm, or his Sword Dao attainment. This was the true nature of his sword intent. And it could be said that this was the uniqueness of his sword intent. Kindness sword intent. A kindness that could cross thousands of mountains and rivers. Kindness sword intent madly gathered around Yi Xian. The sword in his hand trembled violently, and waves of sword light rippled out. At this moment, his momentum had also reached an extremely terrifying level. Borrowing the momentum of the wind. Borrowing the momentum of the earth. At this moment, although Yi Xian was only at the Nether Passage realm, the momentum he emitted had already far surpassed the Nether Passage realm. No, it had even surpassed the Divine Unity realm, and was approaching the Myriad Dharma realm. The cavalry had already arrived in front of the city gate. Yi Xian raised his head and faced the front. He took a step forward, and without any fancy movements, he just stabbed with his sword. When the sword struck, the momentum and intent around him instantly swept out along the spirit elegant sword. It was so strong that it was like a volcano that had been accumulating for countless years suddenly erupting. Its power was enough to destroy the heavens and earth. Boom! The dozens of cavalrymen in front of Yi Xian were instantly pulverized by this sword strike. The sword intent, which carried a terrifying and unparalleled momentum, flooded the remaining cavalrymen like a torrential downpour. Wherever it passed, countless cavalrymen from the Chu kingdom fell to the ground. In less than a breath's time, hundreds of cavalrymen had fallen in front of Yi Xian. The ground was filled with broken limbs and fresh blood. The power of a single sword was so terrifying. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned. Was this something that a Nether Passage realm could do? Not to mention the others in the surroundings. Even Yi Xian himself was stunned, because he'd never imagined that his sword strike would actually be terrifying to such an extent. It should be said that he didn't expect his kind, sword intent to be so terrifying. Without thinking too much, he tapped the ground lightly with the tip of his foot, and rushed out. A dozen or so Chu Kingdom cavalry instantly fell to the ground. But very quickly, he retreated because the cavalry behind him was already charging at him. He couldn't kill them all. Yi Xian retreated to the city gate. The city gate was narrow, and could only allow a dozen cavalry to enter at the same time. To him, this was undoubtedly very advantageous. Just as Yi Xian retreated to the city gate, dozens of cavalry charged at him. Yi Xian swung his sword, and a wave of sword light swept across. Swoosh! Dozens of cavalry fell from their horses in an instant. But in the next moment, dozens of cavalry stepped on countless corpses, and rushed in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian's eyes suddenly opened. Swoosh swoosh. Two rays of sword light shot out like lightning. Wherever they passed, dozens of Chu Kingdom cavalry were instantly cut in half at the waist. Fresh blood splattered on the ground, but in the next moment, another group of Chu Kingdom cavalry charged at him. At this time, Yi Xian bent his finger and pointed forward. Two flying swords shot out from his arms. Swift shadow. The two swords flew through the battlefield silently, and as fast as lightning. Everywhere they passed, heads fell to the ground and blood splattered everywhere. In an instant, the two flying swords killed dozens of cavalry. The ground was littered with corpses. But in the next moment, countless more Chu Kingdom cavalry charged in. The corner of Yi Xian's mouth curled into a sinister smile. His right foot pressed tightly against the ground. Endless power of the earth gathered towards his body. Activate the law of Tao. When the cavalry was still a few meters away from Yi Xian's right foot suddenly stomped on the ground, and his entire body shot out like an arrow released from a bow. In front of Yi Xianqi, the leader of the Chu Kingdom cavalry was instantly beheaded. Immediately after, the cavalry behind him fell to the ground. When Yi Xian appeared outside the city gates, dozens of cavalry behind him had already fallen. Hundreds of corpses were piled up outside the city gates. The cavalry could no longer continue their charge. Yi Xian pointed his longsword diagonally to the ground. On the spirit-elegant sword, fresh blood was slowly dripping down the blade. In front of Yi Xian, the group of cavalry had already stopped. In their eyes there was fear. One man guarding the pass, 10,000 cannot get through. With Yi Xian guarding the city gates, who could break through? At this moment, a powerful force suddenly blasted against the city walls of Mizar City. In an instant boom, the entire city walls of Mizar City collapsed. On the city walls, countless Jiang Kingdom soldiers fell to the ground. The city was breached. No, the city walls were breached. At this moment, there were no city walls in Mizar City. Below, Yi Xian suddenly raised his head and looked at Li Mu. The one who attacked was Li Mu. Li Mu stared at Yi Xian. Can't you block it? Continue to block it for me? Yi Xian's right hand tightly gripped the sword in his hand. His entire body was emitting a ruthless aura. However, this aura was destroyed by his goodwill sword intent. From afar, Li Mu's mouth was full of a sinister smile. Continue to block it. As his voice fell, he waved his right hand. In an instant, 100,000 cavalry charged forward. How terrifying was it when 100,000 cavalry charged forward together? The earth trembled. At this moment, Mizar City no longer had any barriers. P.S. I'm really sorry recently. I haven't had any time to write. Today, I used my phone to write 500 words in the car. My head is about to explode. I won't be naughty today. I'm really sorry. Also, I have a dream. I hope to become famous one day. If I become famous, I won't write anymore. I'll open a small shop and live the rest of my life in peace. But the problem is, when the hell will I become famous? This kind of thing that can't become popular, when will it end? Chapter 169. How could he block it? Yi Xian gripped the spirit-elegant sword tightly in his right hand. At this moment, he realized to his dismay that if an expert of Li Mu's level were to attack, he would not be able to resist at all. Although Li Mu did not attack him openly, the nature of the attack was the same. Mysterious woman? The first person he thought of was indeed the mysterious woman. Given the current situation, the mysterious woman could resolve it with a single sword strike. But on second thought, how could he rely on the mysterious woman for everything? At this moment, Jiangji, Jiangjiu, Baizhe, Mo Yunqi, and countless Zhonglan Academy students and country of Jiang soldiers arrived behind Yi Xian. Looking at the countless Chu cavalrymen charging over from afar, Jiang Jiu and the rest did not show any fear. Jiang Jiu walked to Yi Xian and gently wiped the blood from the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. She said gently, "You've done your best." "Done my best." Yi Xian was stunned. The next moment he smiled. "I've done my best." The future was unknown. All I had to do now was try my best. As for the outcome, there was no need to care too much. All I had to do was try my best. Yi Xian turned around to face the crowd. He said with a smile, "If we die here today, will you regret it?" Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian and said softly, "You could have escaped and died here with us. Will you regret it?" Yi Xian shook his head. "No." Jiang Jiu smiled. "I won't regret it either." "No regrets." Countless people roared in unison. "No regrets." Yi Xian laughed. "Although we were not born in the same year and month, we can die in the same year and month. But before we die, we have to drag someone down with us." With that, he pointed with his right hand. Chi. Two swords streaked across the battlefield. Dozens of feet away, the heads of over a dozen Chu cavalrymen fell to the ground. Fight to the death. Behind Yi Xian, countless people roared in unison. Right at this moment, there was a sudden change in the battlefield. Nearby, Li Mu suddenly turned to look into the distance. There was a group of cavalrymen galloping over. There were tens of thousands of them. The leader was actually a woman. Tuoba Yen, the king of Ning country. Li Mu was stunned. Where did the reinforcements come from? At this time, a Chu Empire cavalry general hurried over. Reporting, "We have discovered a large number of Ning Empire cavalry on the right. They have come with ill intentions." Ning Kingdom's cavalry? Li Mu looked at the cavalry that was charging at him from afar. Soon his expression changed. Because this group of cavalry was charging towards them, Li Mu said ferociously, "What's wrong with Ning Gua? Kill." In the distance, Tuoba Yin roared. The Ning Kingdom's cavalry behind him sped up and charged into the Chu Kingdom's cavalry. Because they were charging from the side, the Chu cavalrymen had no time to defend, and their formation was immediately broken. The nearby Jiangjiu and the others were stunned when they saw this scene. Ning country will send troops to help? They were obviously still a little confused, because they didn't expect that the Ning kingdom would send troops to help at this time. Yi Xian was the first to come back to his senses. He raised his sword and pointed it into the distance. "Kill." With that, he had already rushed out. Behind Yi Xian, countless soldiers of the state of Jiang and students of the Zhonglan Academy also rushed out. At this moment, it could be said that the great Chu cavalry was being attacked from two sides. In the distance, Li Mu's complexion changed. If this chapter is not finished, please continue to the next page. It was extremely unsightly, because he didn't expect that the Ning kingdom would send troops to help at this time. Although the Great Cloud Empire's final plan was to destroy the Ning kingdom, they had never provoked the Ning kingdom until now. Seeing that the Chu cavalrymen were scattered, Li Mu immediately turned to look at the Black Flame army not far away. "Attack!" After a moment of silence, the Black Flame army suddenly rushed out at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, they had already reached the two cavalrymen. Almost in an instant, the Ning kingdom's cavalry was directly crushed. With the Black Flame army joining the battle, the situation of the Chu cavalrymen, who were originally at a disadvantage, was instantly reversed. Seeing this scene, Li Mu was a little shocked. The Black Flame army was too terrifying. This kind of army could even survive in the Divine Central Continent. Not to mention these ordinary soldiers, even the Tao soldiers of the Kuraki Academy might not be able to defeat this cavalry. In the distance, Tuoba Yin clearly noticed this as well. She immediately turned to look at Yi Xian, who was in the crowd not far away. "Help me deal with the Black Flame army first." The Black Flame army. Upon hearing that, Yi Xian's figure trembled, and he directly went to Tuoba Yan's horse. He did not stand on ceremony, and directly wrapped his arms around Tuoba Yan's soft waist. Tuoba Yan frowned slightly, her eyes glinting coldly. Just as she was about to flare up, Yi Xian suddenly said, "I'm not taking advantage of you. Come, let's charge over." As he spoke, his left hand gently tightened around Tuoba Yan's waist, and the two of them were even closer. Tuoba Yin tilted her head and coldly sliced at Yi Xian. In the next moment, she turned her horse around and charged toward the Black Flame army not far away. The two of them were getting closer and closer to the Black Flame army. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Be careful of the Dark World assassins." As soon as he finished speaking, he disappeared from his horse. When he reappeared, he was already in front of the Black Flame army. He swung his sword. Hiss! A Black Flame cavalryman in front of Yi Xian was sent flying by a single swing of his sword. The cavalryman flew over 30 m away, and only stopped after knocking another black flame cavalryman into the air. After he crashed to the ground, he was unable to get up again. The Black Flame Army was invincible in front of the ordinary soldiers of the Jiang Kingdom and Ning Kingdom. However, the Black Flame Army was not invincible in front of Yi Xian, a sword master. A sword master would be able to do very well even in the Central Divine Continent, let alone in the land of Qingzhou, especially a swordsman. A swordsman's combat strength was publicly acknowledged to be formidable. After Yi Xian sent a black flame soldier flying with the swing of his sword, a spear suddenly appeared behind him. There were no unnecessary movements in this spear. It was just an ordinary stab, but this stab was fast and powerful. Yi Xian turned around and stabbed with his sword, blocking the spear. At the same time, a swift shadow suddenly flew out and slashed at the black flame soldier in front of Yi Xian. However, when the swift shadow was about a dozen inches away from the cavalryman, a spear suddenly stabbed from the right. The spear was very fast and instantly stabbed the swift shadow sword. Bang! The swift shadow was instantly sent flying. At the same time, a spear had already arrived at the back of Yi Xian's head. Just as the spear was about to stab into the back of Yi Xian's head, a lightning bolt suddenly blasted the spear. Bang! The spear was sent flying. Tuoba Yin appeared behind Yi Xian. At this time, the surrounding black flame soldiers had already surrounded Yi Xian and Tuoba Yin. The black flame soldiers did not attack. Instead, they surrounded the two and ran quickly. They were so fast that Yi Xian and Tuoba Yin could only see their afterimages. Yi Xian and Tuoba Yin had their backs against each other. Both of their expressions were solemn. Even Yi Xian, who had already achieved the level of sword master, did not dare to underestimate these Black Flame Army soldiers. If this chapter is not over, please continue to the next page. He would not have any problems. But now there were more than 100 of them here. When these Black Flame soldiers grouped together, they were undoubtedly very terrifying. At this moment, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically, because nearly 100 arrows were shooting toward him and Tuoba Yin. Tuoba Yin's pupil shrank. These arrows were so dense that they could not dodge at all. Most importantly, these arrows were all bright-grade spirit weapons. They could pose a fatal threat to both of them. At this critical moment, Yi Xian suddenly pressed his right hand forward lightly. In an instant, a sword intent swept out from his body and formed a thick protective shield that enveloped him and Tuoba Yin. At the same time, 3 swords flew out from his body and flew around him and Tuoba Yin, shooting out bursts of sword light. Bang! 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 In an instant, Yi Xian and Tuoba Yin were drowned by countless arrows. But in an instant, his sword intent became illusory, and the sword light around him was shattered in an instant. These arrows were too terrifying. Yi Xian suddenly turned to Tuoba Yin. I will split open a path. You rush out first. With that, he opened his palm, and the Spirit Elegance sword flew into his hand. In the next moment, he flicked his finger, and the Spirit Elegance sword flew out. A single strike to decide life and death. As soon as the sword flew out, an ear-piercing sound of something tearing resounded. The sword in the lead of the Black Flame cavalryman was instantly pierced through the center of his forehead. At the same time, the powerful force contained within the sword blasted the cavalryman flying. This blasted him flying along with a few Black Flame cavalrymen. Yi Xian seized this opportunity to carry Tuoba Yin in his arms and charge out of the encirclement of the Black Flame cavalrymen. But in the next moment, they just stopped moving when over 100 arrows shot towards them from behind. Every single arrow actually flickered with the glow of an arrow. It was impossible to dodge. Tuoba Yin's pupils constricted. These Black Flame cavalrymen's attainments in the Tao of archery are actually so terrifying. I've still underestimated these Black Flame cavalrymen. This isn't something that anyone below the Dharma realm can resist. Suddenly, Yi Xian pulled her behind him and took a step forward. He flicked his finger, and then the 3 swords slashed forward. The 3 swords emanated dazzling rays of light that blasted many arrows away. But even more arrived in front of him and Tuoba Yin. Yi Xian took another step forward, and the kindness sword intent suddenly appeared in front of him. It condensed into a thick barrier of sword intent. But as soon as the arrows arrived, the barrier instantly became illusory. Moreover, blood even flowed from the corners of Yi Xian's mouth. Yi Xian suddenly turned around. "Why aren't you leaving?" Tuoba Yin gazed at Yi Xian in silence. Blood flowed incessantly from the corners of Yi Xian's mouth, and he roared furiously. "Big sister, hurry up and leave. How the fuck am I supposed to escape if you don't leave?" Tuoba Yin was speechless. Escape? Meanwhile, Li Mu suddenly appeared in the sky above the Black Flame cavalryman. He looked down at Yi Xian and ridiculed. "Yi Xian, are you still thinking of escaping? Let me tell you, today is the day you die. The entire Jiang country and Ning country will be buried with you." With that, he waved his hand, and the Black Flame cavalryman charged directly at Yi Xian and Tuoba Yin. Yi Xian turned to look at Tuoba Yin. "Can you give me a kiss before you die?" The corners of Tuoba Yan's mouth twitched, and she felt like hitting someone. Yi Xian suddenly leaned over and lightly tapped Tuoba Yan's lips. Tuoba Yan's body stiffened. Yi Xian immediately withdrew and leaned over to Tuoba Yan's ear, whispering, "Where did you buy the medicine you brought last time?" Tuoba Yin was speechless. End of this chapter. Chapter 170. Tuoba Yan's face darkened, and she stared fixedly at Yi Xian. If it wasn't for the special circumstances, she would have attacked a long time ago. Has this fellow gone mad? What time is it now? Meanwhile, the group of Black Flame cavalrymen had arrived. Yi Xian suddenly turned around, grinned, and then pressed his palms together before pulling them apart. In an instant, a box appeared in front of him. In the next moment, 12 rays of golden light flashed, and then 12 golden figures instantly appeared in front of Yi Xian and Tuoba Yin. The 12 golden figures opened their eyes slowly, and then 12 rays of golden light instantly shot out from their eyes. Bang! 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 Some of the Black Flame cavalrymen in the lead were blasted flying, and then 12 rays of golden light flashed again. Bang! 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 As soon as the 12 golden figures charged forward, all the Black Flame cavalrymen were blasted flying. Li Mu was completely stunned by this scene. What the hell are those 12 golden figures? Why are they so terrifying? Meanwhile, Yi Xian's heart was bleeding because the 12 golden figures had instantly devoured over 1,000,000 supreme-grade spirit stones from him. All the supreme-grade spirit stones he'd saved up had vanished in an instant. "I have to earn them back." Yi Xian took a deep breath. He pointed the exquisite sword at Li Mu, who was not far away, and grinned hideously. Watch carefully." As soon as he finished speaking, he loosened his grip, and spirit grace shot forward. The heads of over 10 cavalrymen instantly flew into the air. In the blink of an eye, spirit grace slashed horizontally towards the left, and blood sprayed as another 10+ cavalrymen were chopped into two at the waist. This wasn't the end of it. Yi Xian spread his hands apart, and 2 phantom swords suddenly flew out. A few dozen cavalrymen instantly fell to the ground over 30 m away from him, and blood flowed from the center of their brows. A slaughter! At this moment, the cavalrymen around Yi Xian retreated explosively, and their eyes were filled with terror as they gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked up at Li Mu and grinned. "Is it nice?" As soon as he finished speaking, he pressed his fingers together and slashed towards the right. Hiss! A ray of sword light slashed horizontally towards something that was over 60 m away. Chi! The foreheads of more than 10 Chu soldiers were instantly pierced through. Fresh blood splattered on the ground. In the air, Li Mu stared fixedly at. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Looking at Yi Xian, his right hand clenched tightly. Yi Xian opened his right hand, and the Spirit Elegance sword returned to his hand. He looked into the distance. At this moment, the Black Flame cavalry had already calmed down. They had joined forces to surround the 12 golden men, but they couldn't do anything to them. Today, the defense of the 12 golden men was simply too abnormal. For a time, the two sides formed a mutual restraint. Without the restraint of the Black Flame cavalrymen, Yi Xian was freed. Massacre. In a short period of less than an eighth of an hour, some of the high-ranking generals of the Chu Kingdom's cavalry had been completely annihilated. The entire Chu people's heart was in chaos. At this moment, A loud and clear horn suddenly sounded from the distant horizon. When they heard the sound of the horn, the black flame cavalrymen stopped and started to retreat. Retreat! Seeing this, Li Mu's expression changed drastically. He suddenly turned to look at the horizon. Hold on. When the horn stopped, the black flame cavalrymen stopped as well. Li Mu turned to stare fixedly at Yi Xian as a violent aura radiated from his body. Yi Xian walked up to Li Mu and smiled. You want to do it yourself? Why don't you try? Li Mu stared at Yi Xian for a long time. In the end he grinned. If I don't kill you, I won't be able to rest easy. My Karaki Academy won't be able to rest easy. With that, he slammed his palm down at Yi Xian. Seeing that Li Mu was really going to attack, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. At this moment, Tuoba Yen, who had been silent all this while, suddenly appeared in front of him. Tuoba Yen suddenly pulled his hands together. In an instant, a black lightning shield emitting lightning appeared in front of him, and Yi Xian. Boom! The shield in front of Tuoba Yen shattered. In the next moment, Tuoba Yen and Yi Xian were instantly blasted hundreds of meters away. In the end, both of them crashed heavily onto the ground, and the ground in an area of hundreds of meters cracked in an instant. On the ground, blood flowed from the corners of Yi Xian's mouth. At this moment, he felt like his entire body had shattered. As if he had thought of something, he hurriedly stood up and embraced Tuoba Yen. Blood flowed incessantly from Tuoba Yan's mouth. And it wasn't just his mouth. Even his 7 apertures were bleeding. Yi Xian's mind went blank. Tuoba Yen, this chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. Looking at Yi Xian, she seemed like she wanted to say something, but as soon as she opened her mouth, blood gushed out incessantly. Hugging Tuoba Yen tightly, Yi Xian gently wiped the corner of Tuoba Yan's mouth with his trembling right hand, and said in a trembling voice, why are you so stupid? That's an expert above the myriad Dharma realm. Tuoba Yen looked at Yi Xian. Blood was still flowing from her mouth, and the front of her chest was already dyed red. At the same time, her aura was also growing weaker and weaker. How terrifying was a strike from an expert above the myriad Dharma realm. Yi Xian hugged Tuoba Yen tightly, his body trembling incessantly. Looking at Yi Xian in such pain, a complicated look gradually appeared in Tuoba Yan's eyes. She slowly raised her left hand as if to touch Yi Xian's face, but just as she raised it, it fell back down again. At this moment, Jiang Jiu, Imo Yunqi, and the others also came over. Looking at Yi Xian and Tuoba Yen on the ground, Jiang Jiu and the others were stunned. In the distance, Li Mu did not choose to continue after making his move. Instead, he looked around warily. He would never be able to forget the sword immortal dressed in a plain dress. When he made his move earlier, he was already prepared to die. But now, after making his move, he panicked a little. However, he discovered that after he made his move, the sword immortal did not appear. Even after half an hour, the sword immortal still did not appear. At this moment, Li Mu's body suddenly relaxed, and then he laughed maniacally. She didn't appear. Haha, she didn't appear. Saying that, he looked at Yi Xian in the distance with a crazed expression. So you've been faking it all along. Your master won't appear at all. You deceived me so badly. At this moment, Yi Xian gently placed Tuoba Yen on the ground and wiped the blood from the corner of Tuoba Yan's mouth. I'm sorry. Saying that, he slowly stood up and walked toward Li Mu who was nearby. On the ground, Tuoba Yen stretched out her hand, but just as she raised it, it fell back down again. Then, her eyes slowly closed. Yi Xian slowly walked toward Li Mu. He clenched his fists tightly, and his expression was surprisingly calm. Li Mu grinned hideously. Want to kill me? Yi Xian slowly placed his right hand on his chest. After killing this person, I'll search for the second Tao law and release you out of the pagoda. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian's body suddenly trembled violently. The next moment he opened his eyes abruptly. There were 2 eyeballs in his eyes. 2 dark blue eyeballs. End of this chapter. Chapter 171. The moment Yi Xian opened his eyes, his aura suddenly soared. In an instant, it was no weaker than Li Mu's aura. Feeling the aura on Yi Xian's body, Li Mu was stunned. His eyes were filled with disbelief. How is this possible? He knew that there were some divine abilities and secret arts in the world that could temporarily increase a person's cultivation level. However, he had never seen anyone who could increase his cultivation level in an instant. From the Nether Passage realm to his level, this was a jump of 3 realms. This was simply impossible. But at this moment, Yi Xian really did it. On this day, Yi Xian had given him too many surprises. No, it was a shock. This time, he was really shocked. Not far away, Yi Xian slowly walked towards Li Mu. With every step he took, the entire ground would tremble violently. At the same time, the aura around his body was still rising, becoming stronger and stronger. As if there was no end, Li Mu suddenly grinned. Above the Dharma realm? Impossible, I think you're just playing tricks. As his voice fell, he took a step forward and pointed at Yi Xian. As soon as he pointed, the space in front of Yi Xian suddenly shook violently. In the next moment, an illusory giant finger suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. The giant finger contained a powerful force that instantly caused the space in front of Yi Xian to distort. At this time, Yi Xian's right hand suddenly bent inward, forming a claw. In the next moment he clawed forward. Bang! In an instant, the giant finger in front of Yi Xian instantly shattered. Li Mu's pupil shrank, and he lost his voice. How is this possible? No, this is absolutely impossible. You can't reach above the Dharma realm. At this time, Yi Xian smiled coldly. This smile did not look like a human smile, and the surrounding soldiers felt their hair stand on end. Yi Xian suddenly took a step forward, and with this step, he disappeared on the spot. This was no longer speed, but teleportation. Li Mu's expression changed drastically when he saw Yi Xian vanish. He took a step forward and smashed his fist forward. And this punch directly caused the space before him to tremble violently. The 10,000 Laws realm could distort all things to a certain extent. Above the 10,000 Laws realm, one could borrow the power of all things to a certain extent. At this moment, he borrowed the power of space, and the unique properties of space to strengthen his own strength. This realm was known as the Spell Manipulation Realm. Imperial Laws, Imperial Laws, Imperial Laws, Imperial Laws. Li Mu's punch was not a simple one. It could be said that it could directly destroy a city. However, this punch was caught by Yi Xian's claw. Caught it. Seeing his fist being caught by Yi Xian's claw, Li Mu was stunned. At this moment, the power in his fist was also exploding, but it was forcibly blocked by Yi Xian's claw. Yi Xian suddenly clenched Li Mu's fist and twisted it. Crack! Li Mu's entire arm instantly shattered, and blood splattered. Li Mu was shocked and was about to retreat, but at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly pressed forward. Before Li Mu could react, Yi Xian's hand had grabbed Li Mu's throat. In the blink of an eye, Yi Xian had already grabbed Li Mu's throat and appeared hundreds of feet away. As soon as they stopped, Yi Xian grabbed Li Mu's throat and pulled him down. This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page. The ground suddenly smashed. Bang! The ground shattered, and Li Mu's head directly sank into the ground. Yi Xian stepped towards Li Mu's head. Bang! Li Mu's head sunk even deeper, and his body and feet trembled violently on the ground. Yi Xian looked coldly at Li Mu on the ground. In the next moment, he grabbed Li Mu's 2 legs and suddenly tore them apart. Crack! In an instant, Li Mu was directly torn into 2 halves. Seeing this scene, everyone present instantly felt their hair stand on end. A Dharma defensive realm expert was killed by Yi Xian, just like that? Not far away, Yi Xian turned his head and looked around. The soldiers around him all retreated quickly, and some of them were so scared that their legs turned to jelly, and they couldn't even walk. Yi Xian suddenly raised his head and looked towards the horizon, and there was a trace of greed in his eyes. Freedom! It had been a long time since he had obtained freedom. Gradually, he slowly closed his eyes. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly turned his head and looked at the group of black flame cavalrymen not far away. In the next moment he swung his claw. Bang! In the distance, the group of black flame cavalrymen instantly fell to the ground, and in an instant, blood flowed out from their armor. Over 100 people were all dead. However, their armor and equipment were still intact. Yi Xian suddenly turned his head and looked at Tuoba Yen on the ground not far away. With a point of his finger, a ray of green light suddenly entered Tuoba Yan's body. In an instant, his body trembled violently, and in the next moment, an illusory figure suddenly shot into the sky. This illusory figure went straight into the clouds and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Yi Xian, on the other hand, was lying on the ground. His eyes were empty. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. The great god from the second floor had left. He had left with his Tao Law. However, he would return, because the Tao Law could only let him go out for a short period of time. His origin was still locked in the second floor. As long as his origin was still there, he would definitely return. However, he was still a little worried. Based on the great god's possession, this second floor god was really not a kind person. Not only was he not a kind person, but he was also a crazy and perverted fellow. This was because at a certain moment, he had already sensed the other party's killing intent towards him. Although he did not make a move in the end, it was definitely because of the mysterious woman and the world prison pagoda. Otherwise, he would probably have died a few hundred times. This fellow would definitely cause a big trouble if he went out. Yi Xian shook his head and stopped thinking about the great god from the second floor, who had already disappeared. He slowly got up. At this moment, Jiang Jiu hurriedly walked in front of him and supported him. Yi Xian said softly, "Go and chase after the remnants of the Chu Kingdom's army. Leave this to me." When the Black Flame cavalry was completely annihilated, the Chu Kingdom's cavalry had already begun to flee. The Dark World had also instantly disappeared without a trace. Yi Xian was a little weak. This time, the Chu Kingdom's cavalry suffered a heavy blow and fled like startled birds. To our Jiang Kingdom, this is undoubtedly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If we don't seize the opportunity to chase after them and annihilate their main force, we'll be in trouble when they regroup. Don't lose this opportunity. Go, I'll be fine. Jiang Jiu nodded. Be careful. With that, she turned and left. Before long, Jiang Jiu gathered all the soldiers who were still capable of fighting and chased after Tuoba Yen. Yi Xian walked slowly to Tuoba Yen. This chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. Although Tuoba Yen looked very miserable at this moment, his aura was still present. This was the reason why he gave the Tao Law to the great god from the second floor. He had to save Tuoba Yen. Then, he would give the Tao Law to him and let him leave. If he didn't agree, the great god from the second floor would never leave the world prison pagoda, because the Tao Law could suppress him and prevent him from leaving the pagoda. On the other hand, giving the Tao Law to the great god from the second floor was more dangerous for him. If that fellow didn't return and couldn't bring back the Tao Law, then he would definitely be beaten up by the mysterious woman. Yi Xian stopped thinking about the great god from the second floor, who had disappeared to God knows where. He squatted down slowly before Tuoba Yen and looked at the woman before him, with rather complicated feelings in his heart. If Tuoba Yen hadn't utilized that lightning shield earlier, he might have been killed by Li Mu with a single strike. Li Mu. Karaki Academy. Yi Xian clenched his right hand tightly. He'd underestimated Karaki Academy's determination. The stronger the strength he displayed, the more Karaki Academy would think of ways to kill him. The conflict between him and Karaki Academy would never rest until one side was dead. Meanwhile, Tuoba Yan's right hand trembled slightly, and Yi Xian hurriedly carried her. Tuoba Yen slowly opened her eyes, and she was instantly stunned when she saw Yi Xian. You're dead as well. Yi Xian nodded. Yes, I'm here to accompany you. Tuoba Yen was stunned, and then she said, Why are you so silly? You. At this point, she suddenly turned around and looked at Yi Xian with rage in her beautiful eyes. Do you want to die? Yi Xian chuckled. It feels good to joke with you. Tuoba Yen glanced at Yi Xian. Why am I not dead? Yi Xian said, a senior acted. As he spoke, he paused for a moment and asked, Why did you stand in front of me just now? You could have died. Tuoba Yen spoke indifferently. If I knew I would die, I wouldn't have done that. Hearing this, Yi Xian's body stiffened. In an instant, his heart was filled with mixed feelings, disappointment, self-mockery. After a moment he smiled awkwardly. Oh. Tuoba Yin glanced at Yi Xian. She struggled free of Yi Xian's hand and stood up with difficulty. After that, she walked away expressionlessly. It didn't take long for Tuoba Yin to leave with the remaining Ning Kingdom cavalry. At this moment, Mo Yunqi suddenly limped over to Yi Xian, and he lightly nudged the dazed Yi Xian with his right hand. Bandit Yi, are you really stupid or are you pretending to be stupid? Yi Xian looked at Mo Yunqi with a puzzled expression. Mo Yunqi shook his head. Bandit Yi, they came all the way here to help. Who is it for? Is it the Jiang Kingdom? If it weren't for you, the Ning Kingdom would not have come to help the Jiang Kingdom. Moreover, there's something fishy going on between the two of you. I'm sure that Lord Tuoba came for you. As he spoke, he sighed softly. As for your previous question, please think about it carefully. It's a Dharma-controlling realm expert. With Lord Tuoba's wisdom, how could he not know how terrifying Li Mu is? She stood in front of you and prepared for the worst. Yi Xian was stunned. After a moment, he suddenly kicked Mo Yunqi's butt. Why didn't you say so earlier? With that, he disappeared into the distance. On the ground not far away, Mo Yunqi lay on the ground, hugging his butt tightly and wailing. You didn't ask. P.S. And, end of this chapter. Chapter 172. His words enlightened the dreamer. After hearing Mo Yunqi's words, Yi Xian suddenly came to a realization. On a plain, Yi Xian rode the black wolf and galloped wildly. In life, one must not let a misunderstanding become a lifelong regret. Yi Xian's black wolf was obviously faster than ordinary horses. Soon, the Ning Kingdom's cavalry appeared in Yi Xian's sight. In front of him, Tuoba Yin was riding in the lead. Beside her, a cavalry general suddenly said, Your Majesty, someone is chasing behind us. It seems to be Yi Xian of the Jiang Kingdom. Tuoba Yin was expressionless and sped up. The general did not dare to say anything and retreated. At this time, Yi Xian had sped up and was getting closer and closer to the Ning Kingdom soldiers. The Ning Kingdom soldiers turned to look at Yi Xian. No one stopped him, nor did they dare to stop him. Now, Yi Xian's fame was not only in the Jiang Kingdom, but also in the entire Qingzhou. In particular, the scene of Yi Xian tearing Li Mu apart was deeply engraved in the hearts of the Ning Kingdom soldiers. What a ruthless person! Soon, Yi Xian stood in front of Tuoba Yin. The Ning Kingdom's cavalry stopped, but Tuoba Yin did not stop. Instead, he sped up. Seeing that Tuoba Yin did not stop, Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. What was this woman going to do? Below Yi Xian, the black wolf was already roaring with a fierce glint in its eyes. The distance between the two was less than 30 feet. Yi Xian suddenly flew up and landed behind Tuoba Yin in the next moment. Tuoba Yin was about to make a move when Yi Xian suddenly put his arm around Tuoba Yin's waist and said softly, I'm sorry. Tuoba Yin's body stiffened. At this moment, the horse had already rushed dozens of feet away. Behind the two, a group of Ning Kingdom soldiers looked at each other. At the end of the distance, Yi Xian and Tuoba Yin rode slowly. On the horse, Tuoba Yin was expressionless and looked a little cold. Yi Xian's hand was still wrapped around Tuoba Yin's waist. Tuoba Yin did not refuse. Just like that, the two of them were slowly carried by the horse into the distance. Under the setting sun, everything was peaceful. After an unknown period of time, Yi Xian softly said, I'm sorry. Tuoba Yin still said nothing. Yi Xian lightly tapped the ground with his feet and soared into the air before landing steadily in front of Tuoba Yin. The two of them sat opposite each other. Tuoba Yin looked at Yi Xian and said nothing. Yi Xian smiled bitterly because he really didn't know how to coax a woman. He had only coaxed his sister, and she was easy to coax. However, the person in front of him was the Empress. Tuoba Yin was about to jump off his horse when Yi Xian hurriedly pulled his hand. Tuoba Yin looked at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian said softly, Thank you. Tuoba Yin was expressionless and still said nothing. Yi Xian was about to speak when the World Prism Pagoda in his body shook violently. Yi Xian's head instantly suffered a heavy blow, and he fell straight onto the horse. On the ground, Yi Xian's body kept twitching. Tuoba Yin turned to leave, but after a few steps, She suddenly stopped and turned to look at Yi Xian. At this moment, she frowned and quickly walked in front of Yi Xian. At this moment, blood was slowly flowing out of Yi Xian's 7 orifices. Tuoba Yan's face darkened. She squatted in front of Yi Xian and seemed to think of something. She hurriedly took out a golden sour pill and fed it to Yi Xian. But it didn't have any effect. Tuoba Yan took out another golden sour pill. Yi Xian suddenly shook his head and said with a trembling voice, No need. BB backlash. Just rest for a while. Tuoba Yin looked at Yi Xian's twisted features and said nothing. Backlash. In fact, Yi Xian knew that it wasn't just backlash. After the Dao Law left the World Prison Pagoda, the World Prison Pagoda became unstable, and he suffered the most from the instability of the World Prison Pagoda. However, he had no choice. If he didn't let the god on the second floor out for a stroll, the god on the second floor would definitely not help him fight, much less save him. Endure it. But this was really 2F** king painful. It wasn't just physical pain, but also mental pain. At this moment he felt like his head was about to explode. That feeling couldn't be described with words. He could only endure it. Just like that, after an unknown period of time, the sky darkened and a bright moon slowly rose. Moonlight poured down, covering the earth with a thin veil. Under the night sky, Yi Xian's right hand trembled slightly. Gradually he regained consciousness. His first feeling was softness. His lower body was so soft. Soon, Yi Xian discovered that he was lying in Tuoba Yan's arms. Sensing Yi Xian's abnormality, Tuoba Yan looked down at Yi Xian. Yi Xian grinned. It's good to be alive. With that said, he burrowed his head into Tuoba Yan's arms. It was very soft. Although there was a bloody smell, there was a faint body fragrance mixed with the smell of blood. Tuoba Yan's body trembled slightly. In the next moment, she pushed Yi Xian away, got up, and left. Yi Xian quickly stood up and walked to Tuoba Yan. Then, he took out a small wooden figurine and handed it to Tuoba Yan. The wooden figurine was 90% similar to Tuoba Yan's. Yi Xian smiled. I carved it. Tuoba Yan glanced at the wooden figurine and said nothing. Yi Xian stuffed the wooden figurine into Tuoba Yan's hand. Then, he turned and walked toward the Ning Kingdom cavalry 1,000 feet away. Tuoba Yan looked at the wooden figurine in his hand and said nothing. Yi Xian came to a group of Ning Kingdom cavalry. Most of these Ning Kingdom cavalry were injured. Yi Xian bowed deeply to the cavalry. The Ning Kingdom cavalry looked puzzled. Yi Xian said, On behalf of all the people and soldiers of the state of Jiang, I thank you for your support from thousands of miles away. I, Yi Xian, and the state of Jiang will remember this kindness. As he spoke, he took out a storage ring. There are 200 million gold coins in this storage ring. Consider it my treat to everyone. With that said, he pointed his finger, and the storage ring flew to Tuoba Yin not far away. Tuoba Yin looked at the storage ring in front of him in a daze. 200 million gold coins. This was not a small number. In the distance, countless Ning Kingdom cavalry suddenly cheered. State Warrior Yi is righteous. State Warrior Yi is righteous. In an instant, these Ning Kingdom soldiers' favorable impression of Yi Xian skyrocketed. No matter how many words of gratitude they said, it was better to do something practical. If these 200 million gold coins were distributed like this, these Ning Kingdom cavalry would get at least a year's worth of military pay. How could they not be excited? After Yi Xian gave out the storage ring, he cupped his fists to the Ning Kingdom soldiers in the field. Everyone, see you later. With that said, he leaped and flew to the back of the black wolf not far away. Soon, he disappeared into the distant night. In the night, Tuoba Yin tightly held the wooden figurine and storage ring in his hand. Yi Xian returned to Kaiyang City. On the ground, there were corpses and blood everywhere. Some belonged to the Chu Kingdom cavalry, and some belonged to the Jiang Kingdom soldiers. At first glance, it was a shocking sight. War had always been cruel. Not far away, Imo Yunqi walked to Yi Xian and pointed to some corpses not far away. They are all from Azure Billow Academy. I counted 11 people died. 11 people. Yi Xian walked to the dozen corpses. Looking at them, Yi Xian remained silent for a long time. A moment later, Yi Xian said softly. Bring them back to the academy, and bury them in the cemetery of heroes. Every year on this day, all the students and teachers will pay their respects. Their loved ones will be worry-free for the rest of their lives. Old Mo, you will be responsible for this. Mo Yunqi nodded. Don't worry, I will do it well. Yi Xian bowed deeply to the dozen corpses. I am proud of all of you. Azure Billow Academy will also be proud of all of you. Mo Yunqi's eyes instantly became moist. No one wanted people to die, but people were going to die in war. Yi Xian lightly patted Mo Yunqi's shoulder. Then he walked to a place not far away. Not far away, there was a group of horses gathered. They were the Black Flame horses. These horses did not leave, but were guarding the fallen Black Flame cavalrymen. On the ground, there were over 100 Black Flame cavalrymen lying on the ground. Over 100 sets of top-notch equipment. The reason why these Black Flame cavalrymen were so powerful, other than their individual strength, it was also because of their equipment. These equipment were all bright rank. Even if the country of Jiang exhausted all of its resources, it still wouldn't be able to afford it. It was too precious. Yi Xian kept the equipment on the ground. Not only did he want Azure Billow Academy to be equipped with the best equipment, he also wanted to create a cavalry that was even stronger than the Black Flame cavalry. Only with sufficient strength would they not be bullied by others. At this moment, at the end of the horizon, a group of soldiers appeared. Jiang Jiao brought a group of Jiang soldiers and arrived before Yi Xian. She quickly walked towards Yi Xian. We killed over 20,000 Chu soldiers. Yi Xian gently wiped off the bloodstain on Jiang Jiao's face. We won. On the battlefield, countless Jiang soldiers roared in unison. Jiang State won. The group of Azure Billow Academy students also roared in unison. After this battle, these students had undergone some transformations. 1 hour later, before the shattered walls of Mizar City, there were countless corpses lying below the walls. There were at least 20,000 of them. All of them were the corpses of Jiang State soldiers. Some of them were intact, some were damaged, and some were very old, and some were very young. Yi Xian and the others stood before the corpses, and the atmosphere was very heavy. After an unknown period of time, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Bow." Everyone present bowed deeply, including Yi Xian. These soldiers who sacrificed themselves for the country deserved to be bowed by everyone in Jiang State. Yi Xian turned to face everyone before him. Remember, the greatest people of Jiang State are buried here. All of them should be remembered by the people of Jiang State. As he spoke, he pointed at the group of soldiers. Every single one of them is a kingdom scholar of Jiang State. The eyes of all the Jiang State soldiers were filled with tears. Respect. In the past, soldiers actually didn't have a high status, because this was a world of martial artists. For example, in the Kuraki Academy, the students of Kuraki Academy were born to be superior to others. There were also those so-called monstrous geniuses. As for soldiers, how many people respected them? But at this moment, Yi Xian respected them. This feeling of being respected and valued caused some of the soldiers present to be unable to restrain themselves from shedding tears. Jiang Jiao looked at Yi Xian with a trace of complicated emotions in his eyes. Yi Xian felt complicated as well. He had risen up from the bottom. When he was in Azure City, before he became the prince, did the clan care about their lives every time they went out? No. Most of the time, those in power only cared about benefits and results. Soldiers should be respected. Yi Xian suddenly turned to Jiang Jiao. Pick some people for me, around 70 people. I want to establish a Dao soldier. Chapter 173. Dao Soldiers. After witnessing the Dao soldiers of Kuraki Academy and Dark World, Yi Xian had an idea. That was to establish a Dao soldier belonging to Azure Billow Academy. Previously, after seeing the Black Flame Cavalry, he was even more certain of this idea. Azure Billow Academy must have its own powerful Dao soldier. Now he had the equipment. Although he did not have much money, he would have it soon. He only lacked people. Naturally, he would select people from the army. These soldiers had rich combat experience. As long as they were nurtured, They would definitely become elites that could defeat 100 in the future. Jiangju nodded. All right, I will select the people. At this moment, Lu Jioge arrived in front of Yi Xian and Jiang Jiu in her wheelchair. Both of them looked at Lu Jioge. Lu Jioge took out a map and pointed at it. Previously, I had the king lead troops to support Marshal Lin Xiao. The Chu kingdom has suffered a great defeat. I believe the Yu kingdom has also retreated. Great Cloud Empire's Black Flame cavalry was completely annihilated. In a short period of time, they would not dare to easily offend us. This is a golden opportunity for our state of Jiang. Jiang Zhou said in a deep voice. Annihilate Chu state? Lu Jioge smiled. Naturally. If we don't annihilate them now, when? Jiang Jiu shook his head. Although our state of Jiang won, it was a Pyrrhic victory. If another war breaks out. As she spoke, she glanced at the soldiers in the field. Most of the soldiers were already covered in wounds. Lu Jioge smiled. I understand your highness worries. To annihilate these two countries, we do not need an army. One person is enough. One person. Jiang Jiu was stunned, then looked at Yi Xian. Lu Jioge looked at Yi Xian. State scholar Ye's name has spread throughout Azure province. From today onwards, the experts of Myriad Law Realm and above will not dare to make a move. State scholar Yi should grasp such a good opportunity. Yi Xian shook his head. I alone cannot annihilate two countries. Lu Jioge raised the corner of his mouth and did not speak. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, I understand. After speaking, he looked at Jianji and the other two. The three of you bring the students back to Azure Billow Academy. The three of you will be responsible for the academy's affairs. Mo Yunqi smiled bitterly. Bandit Yi, we've just finished fighting. Let's take a break. Yi Xian walked to the front of Mo Yunqi and extended his right hand. There are dozens of people from Songlan Academy. Are you going to support them? The corner of Mo Yunqi's mouth twitched. He took a step back. Fine, pretend I didn't say anything. Yi Xian kicked Mo Yunqi. Get lost. Mo Yunqi snickered, turned around and ran. Jianji walked in front of Yi Xian. Be careful. After saying that, she turned around and left. However, she didn't take 2 steps before she suddenly returned to Yi Xian. She took out a storage ring and placed it in Yi Xian's hand. Then she turned around and left. This time she didn't look back. Yi Xian took a look at the storage ring, and when he saw what was inside, he was stunned. Mantu, steamed bun, chicken drumstick. The storage ring was filled with these 3 items. Most importantly, there were quite a lot of them. There were at least a few hundred steamed buns, a few hundred steamed buns, and 1,000 chicken drumsticks. Oh my god! Yi Xian was dumbfounded. Bai Zhe patted Yi Xian's shoulder lightly. Go home early. After saying that, he turned around and left. The Songlan Academy students came to Yi Xian. Everyone bowed in unison. Take care, Dean. After saying that, everyone turned around and left. However, there was one person who stayed behind. Yi Xian. Yi Xian walked in front of Yi Xian. She lowered her head slightly, but soon, she plucked up her courage and looked at Yi Xian. I just killed 41 people. I killed the most. After saying that, she clenched her 2 small hands tightly. There was some excitement in her eyes. Yi Xian smiled. Impressive. After saying that, he opened his palm. A supreme-grade spiritual weapon appeared in front of Yi Xian. This is your reward. Yi Xian was stunned. Yi Xian smiled. You don't like it? Yi Xian hurriedly took that supreme-grade spiritual weapon. This supreme-grade spiritual weapon was a dagger. It was very small and exquisite. It was the most suitable weapon for Yi Xian. Yi Xian was obviously very fond of it. She caressed it again and again. Yi Xian said softly, after going back, cultivate well. Only when your strength is strong can you live a better life. Yi Xian nodded her little head. She hesitated for a while and then said softly, when there's no one around, can I call you cousin? Cousin. Yi Xian was slightly stunned. In the blink of an eye he smiled and said, sure. Yi Xian was stunned. Obviously, she did not expect Yi Xian to agree. She immediately hugged Yi Xian. Her tears flowed uncontrollably. Cousin. Yi Xian's heart was rather complicated. Yi family. He was becoming more and more unfamiliar with this family. After a while, Yi Xian and the Zhonglan Academy students had already left. Yi Xian did not linger. After bidding farewell to Jiang Jiu, he also left. After watching Yi Xian completely disappear in the distance, Jiang Jiu withdrew his gaze. Beside Jiang Jiu, Lu Jioga suddenly said, "He's very outstanding." Jiang Jiu looked at Lu Jioga. Lu Jioga smiled slightly. "Your Highness, he's growing very quickly. In another year, he might have already gone to the divine central continent. At that time, will your Highness be able to keep up with his footsteps?" Jiang Jiu said softly. "What are you trying to say, State Preceptor Lu?" Lu Jioga said softly. "Your Highness is a smart man. You should know what I mean." Jiang Jiu was silent. At this moment, Lu Jioga suddenly took out a thick black book. The military manual contains 72 battle strategies of my school. It also has the effect of evolving the battlefield. With a single thought, the battle situation can automatically evolve in your mind. Countless endings can be imagined in your mind. In addition, there is also the military school's supreme cultivation method, military tactics. In addition, there are also martial arts techniques. As she spoke, she looked at Lu Jioga. "If you agree to my school's successor outside the city, from this moment on, I will be your Dao protector." Dao protector? Jiang Jiu frowned slightly. "Military school?" Lu Jioga smiled. "Military school. Only by joining my school will you be able to lead Dao soldiers, immortal soldiers, and even legendary soul soldiers, or even existences above them." Jiang Jiu looked deeply at Lu Jioga. "Who exactly are you?" Lu Jioga lightly tapped her legs with both hands. "A cripple. Come with me." With that, she turned and left. Jiang Jiu was silent for a moment, then followed. The news of the battle at Mizar City quickly spread throughout the Azure Province. The entire Azure Province was shocked. The Black Flame Army was completely annihilated. When they received this news, countless people were shocked. This was the Black Flame Army, the most powerful cavalry in the entire Azure Province. And then it was all gone. Yi Xian. Yi Xian's name spread like the plague, quickly spreading throughout the Azure Province. Of course, there was another reason why Yi Xian's name spread so quickly. It was because Yi Xian was now the sword master. A sword master who was not even 20 years old, not to mention in the Azure Province. Even in a place like the Divine Central Continent, he would be considered a top monster. As Yi Xian's fame rose, some matters of the past were also dug up. For example, Yi Xian's expulsion from Kuraki College. Now Kuraki College in the entire Azure Province had become a laughingstock. As for the protagonist, Yi Xian had arrived at the imperial capital of Chu. At this moment, the people of Chu were in a state of panic. The 100,000 cavalrymen of Chu were defeated, and less than 30,000 returned. After suffering such a heavy blow, Chu no longer had any confidence, especially now that Kuraki College and the Great Cloud Empire seemed to have disappeared. Without the backing of Kuraki College, Dark World, and the Great Cloud Empire, could Chu resist Jiang? Would the kingdom of Jiang give up? The entire Chu was in a panic. In the imperial palace of Chu, the monarch of Chu sat on the dragon throne in the main hall. Below him were the ministers of Chu. The monarch of Chu had a cold expression. "What? Are you all mute?" Below him no one spoke. The monarch of Chu suddenly stood up and said angrily, "You are all good for nothings. Is Jiang Guizhou so terrifying? Did he make you lose your courage?" Suddenly, a guard rushed into the main hall in panic. A man has appeared at the entrance of the palace. He calls himself Yi Xian. Yi Xian. Everyone's expression changed drastically. The monarch of Chu slumped down on the dragon throne, and his face was extremely pale. The ministers of Chu had extremely unsightly expressions on their faces as well. It should be said that they were terrified. They'd heard how Yi Xian had treated Tang in the past. He was a homicidal maniac. Is he here to slaughter the imperial family of Chu? At this moment, a man suddenly appeared at the entrance of the main hall. The man's eyes were slightly closed, and he wore an ink-white robe. On his robe, there was still fresh blood that had yet to dry. In his hand, there was a sword that was slowly dripping with fresh blood. "Yi Xian, After Yi Xian arrived in Chu, he directly headed for the imperial palace. Along the way he killed many people. When the soldiers of Chu learned of his name, they didn't dare to block his path. Hence, his journey from the outside of the palace to the main hall could be considered as smooth sailing. Seeing Yi Xian, the ministers retreated one after another. Their eyes were filled with fear. Only a few generals didn't retreat, but their eyes were also filled with dread. On the dragon throne, the monarch of Chu stared fixedly at Yi Xian. His fists were clenched tightly, and they were trembling slightly. Yi Xian raised his sword and slowly walked to the front of the monarch. He raised his head and faced the monarch. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Yi Xian, and I'm from Jiang country. I'm the current dean of Songlan Academy." Impudent. Not far away, a general suddenly roared in anger. "Yi Xian, this is the imperial palace of Chu. How dare you be so impudent? You." The general's voice stopped abruptly, because a sword had been inserted between his brows. The general's eyes were wide open. Fresh blood slowly flowed out from between his brows, and in an instant, his face was dyed red. Subsequently, his entire body fell to the ground. Everyone present was stunned. Yi Xian opened his right hand, and the sword suddenly flew out from between the general's brows. When it reappeared, it was already in Yi Xian's palm. Yi Xian shook his head. "I respect your backbone and courage, but it's time for me to speak. Please give me some face. Otherwise, I'll make all of you speechless for the rest of your lives." After he finished speaking, he slowly walked towards the monarch of Chu. At this moment, an old man appeared behind the monarch. A Dharma realm expert. Yi Xian pointed the spirit elegance sword at the Dharma realm expert. "If you don't want Chu country to perish, then get lost." The old man stared fixedly at Yi Xian, and his eyes were filled with dread. This was because the cause of Li Mu's death had spread throughout the entire Qingzhou. Yi Xian walked in front of the monarch of Chu. Just as the monarch was about to speak, Yi Xian suddenly slashed out with his sword. The monarch of Chu's eyes widened, and he stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Yi Xian grabbed the monarch of Chu's hair with his left hand, and with a light lift, the monarch's head was lifted up. Yi Xian kicked the monarch of Chu's corpse away. He sat on the dragon throne, and he placed the bloody head on the table in front of him. "Now, let's talk about the compensation, especially the compensation for my mental distress. This is a big issue, and we need to discuss it properly. Everyone. P.S. Don't go away." Chapter 174. The hall was deathly silent, and it was deathly still. Dead. The monarch of Chu had died just like that. Some of the weaker ministers of Chu had already collapsed to the ground, while the others were trembling uncontrollably. Only a few of them were able to maintain their composure. Behind Yi Xian, the old man's face was extremely gloomy. He was the only one who had the ability to kill Yi Xian, but he did not dare to do so. Firstly, if he did, he would most likely die first. Li Mu was the best outcome. He was a Dharma defensive realm expert. Secondly, if he did, Yi Xian might vent his anger on the citizens of Chu. By then, all the citizens of Chu would suffer. He could not do it. The old man slowly closed his eyes. Finally he sighed. Chu was now a piece of meat on the chopping board of Jiang. Jiang could cut it however he wanted. Yi Xian faced the ministers of Chu. "Send a representative." No one dared to step forward. Yi Xian shrugged. "Then kill them all." The ministers of Chu were shocked when they heard Yi Xian's words. At this moment a hunchbacked old man walked out. The old man stopped not far from Yi Xian. He looked at Yi Xian without any fear in his eyes. "Old man, Grand Tutor of Chu Li Shi." Yi Xian nodded. "I only have a few conditions. Listen carefully. If you don't agree, we'll get someone else to speak." As he spoke, he placed the Lingxiu sword on the table. "Firstly, I want to take away all the treasures in Chu's treasury. Secondly, Chu has to compensate Jiang country 500 million gold coins every year. Thirdly, Chu has a city called Northern City. This city is quite close to Jiang country. In the future, it will belong to Jiang country. Do you have any problems with these three conditions?" As soon as Yi Xian finished speaking, The expressions of the ministers of Chu turned extremely ugly. Take away all the treasures in Chu's treasury? With this, the Chu country had become a poor country. In addition, the Chu country had to compensate 500 million gold coins every year. This was akin to raising the Chu country like a sheep. The most important thing was the northern city. This city was the second largest city in the Chu country, second only to the imperial capital of the Chu country. Not only that, this city had a natural geographical advantage. To the south, it could defend against the Jiang country and the Ning country. To the back, there was a natural barrier. This was because on both sides of the northern city, there was a vast river. If the Jiang kingdom were to obtain this city, it would be equivalent to grabbing the throat of the Chu kingdom. Li Shi was so angry that his body was trembling. He glared at Yi Xian and said, "You might as well destroy my Chu country." Yi Xian abruptly stood up and kicked the head of the Chu emperor towards Li Shi. He leaned forward and laughed evilly. "Destroy your Chu country? You think I don't want to? You think I can't do it? I didn't destroy your Chu state, because I didn't want more soldiers of my Jiang state to die." As he spoke, he walked in front of Li Shi. "Also, please remember, the war was not started by my Jiang country, it was started by your Chu country." Li Shi clenched his fists tightly. "Don't you think doing this is too cruel?" The corners of Yi Xian's mouth curled up into a mocking smile. "Cruel? If your Chu country were to attack my Jiang country, would you talk about being cruel to my Jiang country? No, I wouldn't. If your Chu country were to attack my Jiang country, countless citizens of my Jiang country would die, and they would die very miserably." As he spoke, he turned around and walked back to the dragon throne. "I'm not a person who's easy to talk to, especially when it comes to your Chu country. I don't want to waste my breath. Whether you can or not, it's just a matter of a single word." As soon as he finished speaking, the spirit elegant sword on the table in front of Yi Xian suddenly trembled slightly. The hall fell silent once more. A threat. Yi Xian was blatantly threatening him without the slightest bit of concealment. Li Shi's body was trembling. Agree? If he agreed, the vitality of the Chu country would be greatly damaged, and it would become a third-rate country. If he didn't agree, the murderous devil in front of him would definitely spill blood in the hall. Yi Xian definitely dared to do it, and he had the strength to do it. No one doubted this. "My Chu country agrees." At this moment, a voice suddenly came from outside the hall. Everyone turned around and saw a woman in her 20s, standing at the entrance of the hall. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. She was wearing a gorgeous palace dress with floral patterns. Upon seeing the woman, the ministers of Chu all bowed in unison. First princess of the Chu kingdom, Chu Chaohan. Under everyone's gaze, Chu Chaohan slowly walked up to Yi Xian and looked straight at Yi Xian. "My Chu country agrees to your 3 conditions." Yi Xian nodded. "Bring me to the treasury of Chu." Chu Chaohan turned to leave. Just like that, under Chu Chaohan's lead, Yi Xian arrived at the Chu kingdom's treasury. Yi Xian didn't even look at them, and just stored them all in the World Prism Pagoda. From start to finish, Chu Chaohan did not speak a single word. Chu Chaohan slowly followed Yi Xian out of the treasury. At the entrance, Yi Xian raised his head and looked down. Below him, there were tens of thousands of Chu soldiers. In the eyes of these soldiers there was fear and dread, but also anger and resentment. Yi Xian shook his head with a smile. "I'm not afraid of your revenge, not in the slightest." Finishing his words, he slowly walked into the distance. At the start, there were 2 soldiers who did not give way, but in the next moment, their heads were sent flying. In an instant, the group of Chu soldiers was about to make a move. At this time, Chu Chaonan, who was not far away, suddenly roared, "Retreat." The group of soldiers looked at Chu Chaonan. Chu Chaonan gave them a cold glance. "All of you retreat. Those who disobey will have their families executed." The group of soldiers unwillingly retreated to the sides, opening up a path. Yi Xian walked into the distance. Suddenly he stopped. At this time, a sword was pressed against Chu Chaonan's forehead. Chu Chaonan was expressionless, and there was not the slightest ripple in his eyes. The surrounding soldiers were enraged, ready to make a move at any time. Yi Xian suddenly said, I don't want Zhang's soldiers to get involved in the war. You're a smart woman. You should know what to do to let Chu live longer. Chu Chaonan stared at Yi Xian. Don't worry. Before you die, Chu's soldiers will not take half a step into Zhang's territory. Yi Xian nodded. You're frank enough. Remember your words. While I'm alive, if Chu makes any moves, things won't be as simple as today. Finishing his words, he quickly walked into the distance. On both sides, none of the Chu soldiers dared to move. In front of the treasury, Chu Chaonan slowly closed his eyes. At this time, the myriad law realm old man from the Great Hall appeared beside Chu Chaonan. Chu Chaonan said softly, Has Karaki College and Great Cloud Empire not replied? The old man shook his head. Chu Chaonan's expression instantly turned cold. Karaki College and Great Cloud Empire. The moment Chu's soldiers were defeated, Chu had sought reinforcements from Karaki College and Great Cloud Empire. This was because Chu knew that Jiang wouldn't let this matter rest. However, Karaki College and Great Cloud Empire didn't reply at all. The old man sighed. That day, the old man didn't agree to attack Jiang. Karaki College and Great Cloud Empire won't treat Chu as an ally. They're just making use of Chu. Unfortunately, the king doesn't listen. Sigh. Chu Chaonan sneered. Don't worry. They will suffer the same fate as Jiang today. As she spoke, she looked in the direction where Yi Xian had left. This person will seek revenge for the smallest grievance. He won't let Karaki College and Great Cloud Empire off. The old man nodded. That day, Jiang's Karaki College drove this person away. How foolish. Chu Chaonan slowly closed his eyes. It's Jiang's fortune to have such a person. After leaving Chu, Yi Xian didn't return to Jiang. Instead, he went to Yu. He alone wouldn't be able to destroy Chu and Yu. Even if Jiang attacked with all its troops, it wouldn't be able to destroy these two countries in a short period of time. Moreover, even if they were destroyed, Jiang's strength would be greatly damaged. Moreover, there was still Karaki College and Great Cloud Empire. Therefore, sending troops now would be disadvantageous to Jiang. However, it was impossible to let Chu and Yu off just like that. Therefore, he thought of the same thing as Lu Jioga. Let the two countries recover first. If this chapter isn't finished, please continue to the next page. The two countries wouldn't be able to recruit soldiers for at least 10 years. This was the reason why he came to plunder them. After he looted them, the two countries would definitely suffer a great loss. Jiang could take this opportunity to develop vigorously. With this, Jiang would become stronger and stronger. Apart from that, Songlong College also needed to develop. And development, you need to spend money. Especially now that he wanted to build a Dao soldier. One could imagine how much money was needed to build a Dao soldier. Yu State. One day later, Yi Xian arrived at Yu State. Just like Chu State, Yu State was in a panic after knowing that Karaki College and Great Cloud Empire were defeated. Obviously, they were afraid of Jiang State's revenge. Yu State's Imperial Palace. At this moment, the Yu State's Imperial Palace was heavily guarded, because Yu State already knew about what happened in Chu State. In the Imperial Palace, the king of Yu State sat on the dragon throne. Dozens of Yu State's ministers stood in front of him. The Imperial Palace was very quiet, and the atmosphere was heavy. The king of Yu State glanced at the crowd. No one wants to say anything? A Yu State's minister stood up. I will live and die with Yu State. Countless ministers saluted in unison. We are willing to live and die with Yu State. Live and die with them. The king of Yu State smiled. Fortunately, the ministers of Yu State have more backbone than the ministers of Chu State. Don't worry, even if the sky falls, I will support it. At this moment, a guard suddenly ran into the imperial palace. Reporting to the king, Yi Xian is here. He has killed more than 100 people. Yi Xian. The expressions of all the ministers instantly changed when they heard this. The king of Yu State spoke indifferently. Send down the order. Don't resist and let him in. The guard was slightly hesitant. The king of Yu State smiled. Do as I say. The guard hesitated for a moment, and then he turned around and left. A short moment later, Yi Xian walked into the imperial palace with a sword in his hand, and the sword in his hand was still bleeding. Everyone present was looking at Yi Xian. the youngest sword master in the Azure Prefecture. The king of Yu State sized up Yi Xian and smiled. As expected of the youngest sword master in the Azure Prefecture, the elegance of a swordsman is obvious. Yi Xian stopped moving. Right at this moment, a man suddenly appeared outside the imperial palace. The man was around the age of 20, wore a white robe, and had a similar appearance to the king of Yu State. There was a young man behind the man. The young man wore green clothes and held a jade pendant in his hand. The white-robed man walked over to the king of Yu State and bowed deeply. Imperial father. The king of Yu State frowned and said angrily, "What are you doing back here? Who notified you?" The man shook his head. "How can I not return when my country is in trouble?" As he spoke, he turned around and gazed at the green-clothed man who stood nearby. The green-clothed man gazed at Yi Xian. "You're from the Azure Prefecture's Zhonglan Academy?" Yi Xian nodded. The green-clothed man withdrew a command token. "Do you recognize this?" "The Zhonglan token." Yi Xian frowned. The green-clothed man walked over to Yi Xian with a rather arrogant expression. "I'm the head disciple of the outer court of Zhonglan Academy in the Central Divine Prefecture. Now, I order you to leave the state of Yu State immediately." "You." The green-clothed man's voice stopped abruptly, because a sword was pressed against the center of the green-clothed man's forehead. Everyone here was stunned. Yi Xian shook his head. "Head disciple? I'm even the dean. Am I too arrogant?" P.S. It's all out. He had only returned to Beijing yesterday, and it was already night time when he returned. I wrote until 4 in the morning. Of course, compared to before, the outburst this time is much smaller, only 6 chapters. However, during this period of time, I really have no other choice. I've really tried my best. You can scold me all you want, as long as you don't involve my family really. Also, for the next few days, there will be double monthly votes. Voting for 1 monthly vote is equivalent to voting for 2. Please support me. End of this chapter. Chapter 175. It was deathly silent in the hall. Everyone was stunned. He didn't even give face to Zhonglan Academy's General Institute. Wasn't Yi Xian from Zhonglan Academy? Everyone was completely dumbfounded. It wasn't just them. Even the azure-clothed man and the white-robed man were dumbfounded. He was the crown prince of the Chu Kingdom, who'd always been gaining experience outside. He'd made a trip to the divine central continent and gotten to know this azure-clothed man. The Yu Kingdom was in trouble this time, and since Yi Xian was from Zhonglan Academy, he'd specially invited this azure-clothed man. Yi Xian was from Zhonglan Academy, so he had to give face to Zhonglan Academy of the divine central continent, right? However, he realized that he'd made the wrong decision. The azure-clothed man stood before Yi Xian and looked at Yi Xian in horror. Even though Yi Xian had taken him by surprise and caught him off guard, he shouldn't have been unable to fight back. There was only one possibility, and that was that Yi Xian's strength far surpassed his. When he thought up to this point, the azure-clothed man put away his contempt and arrogance and said in a low voice, "We're both students of Zhonglan Academy." Yi Xian smiled and said, "I'm from Zhonglan Academy, but it's different from your Zhonglan Academy. This matter is between me and the Yu Kingdom. Don't speak out of turn, understand?" The azure-clothed man gazed at Yi Xian. "You don't recognize the General Institute." Yi Xian chuckled. "It was the General Institute that didn't recognize us first." The azure-clothed man wanted to say something, but Yi Xian suddenly thrust his sword forward. Hiss! The sword pierced half an inch into the azure-clothed man's forehead, and blood flowed out. The azure-clothed man's pupils constricted, and he was extremely shocked. Yi Xian grinned. "I'll kill you if you say another word." The azure-clothed man took a deep look at Yi Xian, and then he turned and left. He hadn't said a single word, and he didn't dare say anything harsh, because he'd realized that Yi Xian really dared to kill him. Under such circumstances, saying anything harsh was undoubtedly an extremely stupid thing to do. Seeing that the green-robed man was about to leave, the white-robed man was shocked and hurriedly chased after him. "Brother Gu." The green-robed man stopped. "I'm sorry, I can't do anything." With that, he quickly disappeared into the distance. Peace was restored in the hall. Yi Xian turned and walked towards the Yu country's monarch. At this moment, some of the Yu country's ministers suddenly appeared in front of the Yu country's monarch. In the beginning, there were only a few of them, but soon, more and more of them appeared in front of Yi Xian. In the eyes of the minister, there was fear and dread, but there was also the look of facing death with equanimity. In the territory of the Qing province, no one in the Dharma realm could stop Yi Xian. Yi Xian thought for a moment before looking at the king of Yu and saying, "You don't look like a fool. Why did you start this war?" The Yu country's monarch stood up and walked towards Yi Xian. At this moment, the white-robed man hastily stood in front of him. "Imperial father." The Yu country's monarch shook his head. He walked past the white-robed man and arrived in front of Yi Xian. "My Yu country doesn't have the strength to reject Kuraki College and Great Cloud Empire. Of course, it's also because of my greed. If we won the war and devoured Jiang country, our country's strength would surely increase greatly. Unfortunately, I didn't take you into account." Yi Xian nodded. "Are you ready to pay the price?" Yi Xian. Behind the king of Yu country, the white-robed man suddenly rushed in front of Yi Xian. He glared at Yi Xian. "Don't go too far. Even if my Yu country dies, we..." All of a sudden, Yi Xian thrust his sword at the white-robed man's throat. At this moment, countless Yu country soldiers rushed in. The main hall was instantly filled to the brim. Not only the main hall, but even the outside of the main hall was filled with Yu soldiers. A war was about to break out. Yi Xian suddenly pointed to the left with his left hand. Two flying swords slashed out side by side. About 3 meters away, the heads of over 20 Yu country's soldiers flew off. In the next instant, his left hand made a slash to his back. The two flying swords shuttled past. Behind Yi Xian, over 20 soldiers fell to the ground without any warning. The spectators were still in a daze. When Yi Xian was about to continue his attack, the Yu country's monarch suddenly said, "My Chu country admits defeat." As soon as the Yu country's monarch's voice faded, the two flying swords stopped at the throats of 2 Yu country's soldiers. A thin layer of skin had been cut open. Cold sweat trickled down the foreheads of the 2 soldiers. If the Yu country's monarch spoke a little later, their heads would have flown off. Yi Xian lightly hooked his left hand, and the 2 swords flew back to his side. He faced the king of Yu. "I believe you should already know the conditions I set out in Chu. Do you have any objections?" Just as the king of Chu was about to speak, the white-robed man whom Yi Xian had pointed his sword at wanted to speak first. However, just as he opened his mouth, Yi Xian's sword had already pierced half an inch into his mouth. Chi! The space between the white-robed man's brows split open and blood seeped out slowly. Yi Xian grinned. "One more time. His head will fall off." The white-robed man glared at Yi Xian. Clearly, he didn't want to admit defeat and was about to speak. At this moment, the Yu king suddenly pulled the white-robed man back and slapped him across the face. Pa! The slap was loud and clear. The king of Yu coldly looked at the white-robed man. Is there any meaning in trying to be brave at this time? The white-robed man's expression was somewhat malevolent. "My Yu nation has so many soldiers. Why do we need to fear him? Why not give it a try?" The king of Yu shook his head, and his eyes were filled with disappointment. Was Yi Xian really alone? If Yi Xian was alone, the Yu nation wouldn't be afraid, even if he was a sword master. However, Yi Xian wasn't alone. He had a sword immortal behind him, the Jiang country, the drunken immortal Inn, the Ning country. Once an all-out war broke out, the Chu country wouldn't be able to resist without Kuraki College, Dark World, and the Great Cloud Empire's support. The king of Chu couldn't see this point, but Chu Chaohan understood it. Therefore, she allowed Yi Xian to demand without restraint. At this moment, if the Yu nation were to make a move, the Yu nation would undoubtedly be annihilated. The king of Yu suddenly said, "From this moment onwards, the crown prince will be stripped of his title. The crown prince will be succeeded by the third prince Yu Ming. Senior Mo Yin will be the grand tutor and prime minister." The white-robed man was dumbfounded. "Imperial father." The king of Yu state gently waved his hand, and a 10,000 laws realm expert appeared in front of the white-robed man. The white-robed man wanted to say something, but the 10,000 Laws Realm expert sighed. Crown Prince, the king doesn't want you to die. After speaking, he grabbed the white-robed man's shoulder and disappeared from the hall. However, the Yu Nation's soldiers didn't retreat. They still surrounded Yi Xian, but no one dared to make a move. The king of Yu looked at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. The Jiang country is fortunate to have a talent like you. Yi Xian didn't say anything. The king of Yu smiled. One last question. Are your next targets Kuraki College, Dark World, or the Great Cloud Empire? Yi Xian nodded. The king of Yu laughed. Finally, he turned around and walked back to the dragon throne. He sat down and in the next moment, he drew a golden dagger from his waist and slit his throat. Chi. Blood splattered. Below, Yi Xian turned around and left. Genius 1 second remember website. Mobile version website. Chapter 176. The king of Yu must die. This was Yi Xian's stance. The Yu and Chu kingdoms had waged war against the Jiang kingdom, and countless soldiers of the Jiang kingdom had died in battle. The two kingdoms must pay the price. Yi Xian walked out of the main hall and headed straight for the Yu kingdom's treasury. The main hall was filled with wails of grief. An hour later, Yi Xian left the Yu kingdom's imperial palace. This time, Yi Xian didn't choose to leave on Black Wolf. Instead, he took the drunken immortal In's cloud ship, because he could check his treasures on the cloud ship. As for Kuraki Academy and the Great Cloud Empire in the Central Plains, he naturally wouldn't go there to throw his life away. The Jiang kingdom might have won, but Kuraki Academy and the Dark World hadn't suffered much damage, especially the Great Cloud Empire, whose overall strength was still there. He had to take it slow. His top priority now was to improve his strength and the strength of those around him. Moreover, he had to establish the Dao soldiers of Kuraki Academy. Yi Xian was the only guest on the entire cloud ship. This was a convenience that the drunken immortal In had given him. In a luxurious private room, Yi Xian was sitting on the floor. At the moment he was checking his treasures. He had obtained a lot of things after looting the Chu and Yu kingdoms. Among them there were 1.4 billion gold coins. Including his own, he now had almost 1.6 billion gold coins. Apart from gold coins, there were more than 2 million supreme-grade spirit stones and 12 jade-grade spirit stones. Among them, there were a total of 25 earth-rank cultivation techniques, martial techniques, and movement techniques. In addition to the ones he'd accumulated in the past, he had around 35 in total. As for the supreme-grade spiritual weapons, he had obtained a total of 36 this time. In addition to his previous savings, he now had 85 supreme-grade spiritual weapons. Apart from that, there were also light-grade spirit weapons, but not many, only about 6. This time, he was lucky because there were 2 swords among them. Swords. Yi Xian brought the 2 swords in front of him. The 2 swords were different from the Swift Shadow Sword. One of the swords was wider, and there was a lightning-like pattern on the blade. The hilt was pitch black, and it felt bone-chilling to the touch. The other sword was thinner, slightly longer, and both sides of the blade gave off a chilly glow. 2 light-grade low-grade swords. Devour? Yi Xian didn't hesitate, and directly devoured it. As soon as the 2 swords entered his body, they turned into countless streams of energy, and dispersed towards Yi Xian's limbs and bones. Nether Passage Realm. With his current strength, he wasn't strong enough to fight against the 10,000 Laws boundary. However, if he reached the Divine Combination Realm, he would be able to fight against the 10,000 Laws boundary. Even if he couldn't win, he wouldn't be unable to fight back. If he were to face tens of thousands of Dharma State experts right now, he would definitely be beaten up. He had to reach the Divine Unity Realm. As for the 2 Swift Shadow Swords, he did not devour them because they were extremely useful to him now. They were not any weaker than the exquisite Spirit Sword. Now that he was facing an enemy, the 2 flying swords were very lethal. The 2 swords could be kept. Moreover, with his current wealth, he was entirely capable of finding even more swords from the immortal indulgence in the future. Inside the cloud ship, Yi Xian was frantically devouring the energy within the bright stage. His aura was also growing, and the spirit elegant sword in his body was also trembling slightly as it continuously absorbed the energy. Outside, what Yi Xian had done in Chu, and you had quickly spread throughout the entire Qing province. Now, Yi Xian's reputation was like the sun at high noon in the entire Qing province. And in Jiang country, Yi Xian's reputation had reached its peak. Every day, countless people would come to the foot of the mountain of Azure Billow's Academy. Some wanted to enter Azure Billow's Academy, while others wanted to meet Yi Xian. As for Dark World, Kuraki Academy, and Great Cloud Empire, ever since the battle at Mizar City, these three forces had not made any moves. One day later, the cloud ship arrived at Jiang country. After the cloud ship stopped, Yi Xian did not leave the ship. This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page. On the deck of the cloud ship, two delicate and pretty ladies were whispering. I saw that swordsman yesterday. How did he look? Very handsome. Even if he didn't come out after entering the box, we can't go in, Sai. Wow, look at your infatuated look. He's the sword master. Don't think too much. So what if he's the sword master? Why don't we drug him? Aya, you damned girl, don't you have any shame? Cough. A light cough came from behind the two ladies. The two ladies turned around and were shocked to see the person who came. In an instant, their faces turned red like the rosy clouds in the sky. They were extremely shy. The person who came was Yi Xian. Yi Xian walked down the ship. Just as he was about to disembark, he looked up at the sky with a face full of worry. Being too handsome is also a kind of trouble. After saying that, he jumped off the cloud ship. On the deck, the two ladies covered their faces in embarrassment. After Yi Xian got off the ship, he went straight to Azure Billow's Academy. He was still in the Nether Passage realm. Devouring the two swords did not help him reach the Divine Unity realm, nor did it help the Spirit Elegant sword. This made him quite disappointed. At the same time, he also realized that after he reached the Nether Passage realm, his requirements for swords were getting higher and higher, especially the Spirit Elegant sword. In order to reach the Truth Middle Grade, he had to devour countless bright grade swords. At first, he thought that it would be at most 4 or 5, but now it seemed that he was too naive. If he and the Spirit Elegant sword wanted to improve further, they would probably need at least 10 bright grade swords, or even more. At the thought of this, Yi Xian suddenly felt that he was very poor again. Not long after, Yi Xian entered the city. At this moment, the imperial capital was in a state of jubilation. The state of Jiang had won. When the armies of the state of Chu, state of Yu, Kuraki Academy, and the Great Cloud Empire pressed down, the people of the state of Jiang were naturally terrified. Because if the state of Jiang perished, they would become slaves, and their fates would be very tragic. And the state of Jiang had won. Looking at the jubilant people in the city, a smile appeared on Yi Xian's face. Protect the country. He did not think too much. He only knew that he, the soldiers of the state of Jiang, and the students of the Azure Billows Academy, had fought to the death in Mizar City, allowing many people to survive. Responsibility. When he was young, his mother suddenly ran away. At that moment, looking at his petite sister, he felt a sense of responsibility for the first time. He had to protect his sister well. This was the responsibility of an elder brother. When he grew up, as the heir of the Yi family, he had an additional responsibility at that moment. To seek benefits for the family, to fight for the family. Although the family later abandoned him and his sister, he had never let down the Yi family. And now, he was the dean of the Azure Billows Academy, the state scholar of the state of Yi, and the big brother of Baizhe and Mo Yunqi. The responsibility had always been there, and it was getting bigger and bigger. And as a man, he should shoulder the responsibility that belonged to him. Tired? Yes, he would be very tired. But if he did not have a good family and a good father, if he was not tired, then he could only be a good for nothing. Thinking of this, suddenly, a sword intent emitted from Yi Xian's body. Yi Xian was stunned. This sword intent came out on its own. This sword intent has its own consciousness? Yi Xian was shocked by his own thoughts. Another thing was, since it was the good and evil sword intent, which meant that there was a good side, then there must be an evil side. But what about the evil side? What was the power of the evil thought's sword intent? This chapter is not finished. Please continue to the next page. Yi Xian was a little curious. Are you state scholar Yi? At this moment, a voice suddenly came from beside Yi Xian's ears. Yi Xian stopped and turned around. On his right stood a lady holding a flower butterfly umbrella. The lady was beautiful and had an excellent figure. At this moment, the lady was sizing him up, her eyes filled with suspicion. As the lady's voice fell, the surrounding people also looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said seriously, I am not state scholar Yi. State scholar Yi is handsome, dignified, talented, and elegant. His handsomeness is indescribable. How can I be state scholar Yi? I am not even 1/10,000th of him. The lady. After saying that, Yi Xian did not blush or pant. He turned around and walked into the distance. At this moment, the lady suddenly walked to Yi Xian's side. She took out a portrait. In the portrait, it was Yi Xian. The lady looked at the portrait, then turned to look at Yi Xian. She said softly, very similar. Yi Xian. At this moment, the lady suddenly stood in front of Yi Xian. She stared straight at Yi Xian. Are you? Yi Xian was a little helpless. What are you trying to do? Hearing Yi Xian's words, the lady's eyes lit up. You really are. As she said that, the umbrella in her hand suddenly closed. In the next moment, the umbrella in her hand was pointed at Yi Xian's forehead. Sword force. Sword intent. A grandmaster of the sword Dao. Yi Xian was shocked. This lady is actually a grandmaster of the sword Dao. Moreover, the umbrella in her hand is actually a sword at the true grade. No, it should be called an umbrella sword. Yi Xian didn't think too much about it. A sword intent suddenly blocked in front of him. Kindness sword intent. The kindness sword intent formed a thick shield that forcefully blocked the lady's umbrella sword. There was a trace of surprise in the lady's eyes when she saw Yi Xian's sword intent. What a strange sword intent. I've never seen it before. As soon as she said that, her lily-white hand spun lightly. The umbrella sword suddenly unfolded. Bang! Yi Xian was instantly blasted 30 meters away. But in the next moment, a flying sword pierced the lady's umbrella sword. Bang! The lady retreated repeatedly. This time, she retreated over 60 meters. After the lady stopped, she looked up at Yi Xian. There was a trace of excitement in her eyes. Sword master. You've really become a sword master. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. You were sent here by Karaki Academy? The lady was slightly stunned, and then she shook her head. I'm Jian Chuchu from the Jian clan. My younger brother is Jian Xiaowang. You should know him, right? Jian Xiaowang? Yi Xian was stunned. He naturally knew her, because Jian Xiaowang and Gong Qingqing had helped him in the Ning Kingdom's secret realm. Jian Chuchu sized Yi Xian up and said, I was about to head to the Central Divine Prefecture, but I suddenly heard that you've become a sword master. So I came to have a spar with you. You're very formidable, and I might not be able to defeat you now. Yi Xian smiled. You're not bad as well. Jian Chuchu walked over to Yi Xian and asked curiously, How did you become a sword master? Can you share your experience with me? Yi Xian was stunned. This fellow is asking me so openly? Isn't she afraid at all? Jian Chuchu blinked. Can I? Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he said, Why don't you join my Azure Billow Academy? We can have an exchange in the Sword Dao in the future. What do you think? Jian Chuchu didn't even think about it, and immediately nodded. All right. Yi Xian was speechless. P.S. I've just returned to Beijing. After I catch my breath, I'll wait until midnight. Does anyone have any objections? No. All right. Thank you very much for your understanding. I love all of you. End of this chapter. Chapter 177. Great. Yi Xian was stunned. She agreed just like that? Yi Xian wanted to confirm it, so he asked, Are you willing to join Songlan Academy? Jian Chuchu nodded. Yes. You are so powerful. I should be able to gain a lot by following you. However, if I am stronger than you one day, I will have to leave. Yi Xian smiled. Sure. Let's go back to Songlan Academy with me. Just like that, Songlan Academy had one more Sword Dao Grandmaster student. Of course, Yi Xian was very happy. Sword Dao Grandmaster. Moreover, from his previous exchange with Jian Chuchu, she was already at the peak of Sword Dao Grandmaster, and could reach Sword Master at any time. If Jian Chuchu reached Sword Master, Songlan Academy would have one more super warrior. After Yi Xian brought Jian Chuchu back to Songlan Academy, he immediately gathered all the students. There were less than 30 students left in Songlan Academy. However, after the battle at Mizar City, they had matured a lot. In front of Songlan Palace, Yi Xian faced everyone. On his left and right were Bai Zai, Mo Yunqi, Ji Anji and Jian Chuchu, who had just joined Songlan Academy. Yi Xian walked in front of the students. Stay alive, okay? Everyone was stunned. They didn't understand Yi Xian's meaning. Yi Xian said softly, "Many of our brothers died in Mizar City." Everyone was silent. Yi Xian said, "One of my brothers once said, if you are not strong enough, you will be beaten to death. That is what we deserve. Let me say this to all of you. This world isn't so beautiful, it is very cruel. If you are strong, it means you have a better chance of survival. From now on, all of you will double your daily cultivation." As he spoke, he opened his right hand, and a bright grade spiritual artifact appeared in his hand. At the sight of this bright rank spirit weapon, many of the students were stunned. Yi Xian said, "Do you want it?" Everyone nodded. Yi Xian said, "Do you want it?" "Sure. Whoever reaches Divine Unity Realm first will have it." Divine Combination Realm. The expressions of some people instantly turned bitter, because among them, there were some who were only in the Levitation Realm. At this time, Yi Xian continued, "In addition to this, there will be an additional rule. There will be a test every month, and the top 3 will be rewarded with an Earth rank martial technique and cultivation technique. The first place will also be rewarded with an additional top-grade spirit weapon. As for the last person, he will be expelled from Songlan Academy." When they heard Yi Xian's words, everyone present was stunned. Mo Yunqi's group of 3 looked at Yi Xian as well. Expulsion from school? This was a very serious matter. Yi Xian said indifferently, "There are rewards and punishments. What I said just now will be implemented from this moment on. Now dismiss." The expressions of all the students instantly became solemn when they heard this. Expulsion from school. Right now, the people of Jiang country were proud to be a student of Songlan Academy. If they were expelled, it would mean that all the glory would vanish into thin air. No one wanted to leave. In an instant, the hearts of all the students of Songlan Academy had tightened. After the students dispersed, Mo Yunqi walked over to Yi Xian's side and said softly, "Bandit Yi, isn't this too cruel?" Yi Xian shook his head. "You've seen the Dao soldiers of Kuraki Academy, the 9th Mercenary Group, and the Black Flame Army of the Great Cloud Empire. How do you think our students compare to them?" Mo Yunqi fell silent, because there was no comparison at all. Yi Xian said softly, "If we don't be cruel to them today, then our enemies will be even more cruel to them in the future. As for the 3 of you, Senior Mo, Senior Bai, and Senior Anji, your strengths aren't sufficient, and there's quite a gap between you and the true monstrous geniuses of the Central Divine Prefecture. Work hard. I'll do my best to get all the resources all of you need. I only hope that when we look back in a very, very long time from now, all of our brothers will still be here." This chapter isn't finished. Please continue to the next page. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Mo Yunqi's group of 3 remained silent. All of them had attained the Divine Combination Realm, and Ji Anji was at the Divine Combination Realm as well. However, this was utterly insufficient. There was a difference in strength amongst the Divine Combination Realm as well. The 3 of them really weren't very strong when it came to defeating the Central Divine Prefecture. A short moment later, Mo Yunqi spoke abruptly. "Let's double our cultivation as well." Bai Zai nodded. Ji Anji just gnawed on his steamed bun and didn't say anything. Jian Chuchu spoke abruptly. "The Great Cloud Empire is very formidable." The 3 of them gazed at Jian Chuchu, and then she spoke in a serious tone. "I made some calculations just now. If Azure Billow Academy were to fight the Great Cloud Empire head-on, then Azure Billow Academy wouldn't have any chance of winning. Right. It seems like all of you have two more enemies, Kuraki Academy and the Dark World. If these two powers join the battle as well, then your chances of winning will be negative. Emo Yunchi spoke with slight displeasure. We won just now. Jian Chuchu gazed at Emo Yunchi with slight pity. You're so stupid. Emo Yunchi almost went berserk. Jian Chuchu said, if Yi Xian attains the Divine Combination Realm, then it means that a Dharma Realm expert will appear in the Central Divine Prefecture. The expressions of Emo Yunchi's group instantly changed when they heard Jian Chuchu. They'd actually forgotten that. The Dharma Realm. If Yi Xian's strength improved, then it meant that Kuraki Academy and the Dark World could dispatch Dharma Realm experts. At that time, how could Azure Billow Academy resist the Dharma Realm experts? After a while, the three of them turned and left. Cultivation. Cultivation that risked one's life. Whether it was the state of Jiang or Azure Billow Academy, they hadn't won yet. To put it more seriously, this was just the beginning. Because the Dharma Realm was the core combat power of these powers. Yi Xian arrived at the Martyr's Palace. He sat on the ground, and after a long silence he suddenly spoke softly. Old Ji, Azure Billow Academy is getting better and better. Don't worry, I'll lead everyone to better things. I'll also let Azure Billow Academy of the Central Divine Prefecture know that our state of Zhang's Azure Billow Academy isn't inferior to them at all. The Martyr's Palace was brightly lit, and only Yi Xian's murmur could be heard. After an unknown period of time, Yi Xian lay down in the palace and fell asleep. Early in the morning, a red sun slowly rose from the horizon, and all things awakened. Yi Xian had woken up. At this moment, a thick blanket had appeared on his body, and it even carried a faint fragrance. Yi Xian smiled slightly, folded the blanket and put it aside. Then, he walked out of the Martyr's Palace. Sunlight shone down, and Yi Xian stretched lazily. He said with a smile, everything is so familiar. Yi Xian suddenly turned his head to look. In the distance, Jiang Jie was walking toward him. He was still dressed in silver armor, and he was still as good-looking as ever. Jiang Jie walked up to Yi Xian. I've already chosen the people. Yi Xian nodded. Take me to them. Jiang Jie turned around and led Yi Xian to an open space. There were 70 or so people standing in front of Yi Xian. The oldest was in his 30s, and the youngest was in his 20s. All 70 people exuded a murderous aura. One look, and one could tell that they were battle-hardened warriors. When they saw Yi Xian, the 70 people knelt on one knee. Greetings, State Scholar Yi. The 70 people looked excited. They respected Yi Xian from the bottom of their hearts. At the side, Jiang Jie sighed with emotion. Fortunately, Yi Xian had no evil intentions. Otherwise, it would be a piece of cake for him to topple the Jiang country's imperial family. Yi Xian's prestige in the Jiang country had already surpassed the Jiang country's imperial family. Not far away, Yi Xian said, Rise. The 70 people stood up and looked at Yi Xian with a trace of excitement in their eyes. Yi Xian said softly, From now on, you are students of my Azure Billow Academy. If you are unwilling, you can step forward. I won't force you. Not a single person stepped forward. Yi Xian nodded slightly. This chapter is not over. Please continue. He nodded slightly. From now on, I will give you the best resources and the best equipment. I will make you the most elite Dao soldiers in the Azure Prefecture. Of course, the training you will undergo will be cruel, extremely cruel. Moreover, there will be an assessment every month. The bottom 3 will be directly eliminated. Directly eliminated. Everyone's expression gradually turned solemn. Yi Xian turned to Jiang Jie. Every month, I need 3 more soldiers to replace those who are eliminated. Jiang Jie nodded. All right, Yi Xian said again. They will be released from the military. In the future, they may only listen to my orders. Jiang Jie looked at Yi Xian and did not speak. Yi Xian said, Is that all right? Jiang Jie was still silent. Yi Xian did not speak either. After a moment, Jiang Jie said, You don't trust us? Yi Xian shook his head. I have my own selfish motives. This Dao soldier is the foundation of my Azure Billow Academy. I want to control it. If you don't agree, I will look for someone else. After this cavalry was trained, it would definitely be very terrifying in the future. He did not want this cavalry to fall into the hands of others. This was what he prepared for Azure Billow Academy. Jiangjiu said indifferently, "Don't worry. We will not touch this cavalry." After speaking, she turned and left. There was a trace of self-ridicule on the corners of her mouth. Yi Xian suddenly appeared before Jiangjiu. Jiangjiu looked at Yi Xian with a rather cold expression. "What?" Yi Xian said in a light voice. "Are you angry?" Jiangjiu nodded. "I am unhappy in my heart." She was unhappy not because Jiang country could not touch this Dao soldier, but because she felt that Yi Xian did not trust her. Yi Xian smiled lightly. "I hope that you will lead this cavalry in the future." Jiangjiu was stunned. Yi Xian said in a light voice, "Little Jiu, I do not want your imperial family to touch this cavalry, because if you let them touch it, the purpose of this cavalry's existence might change. To put it bluntly, even if I am no longer around, Azure Billow Academy must have the strength to protect itself. And I trust you." Jiangjiu went silent for a moment and said, "Don't worry. This cavalry only belongs to Azure Billow Academy. It will not belong to Jiang country's imperial family. Jiang country's imperial family does not have the qualifications to touch this cavalry. But if Jiang country is in trouble in the future, I hope that this cavalry will be able to defend Jiang country." Yi Xian nodded. "Of course. But if Jiang country's imperial family is in internal strife, then they will absolutely not participate." Jiangjiu gazed at Yi Xian. "With both of us here, there won't be any chaos." Yi Xian smiled. "That's true." Jiangjiu spoke in a low voice. "I will be training this cavalry from now on. Who do you intend to train them?" Yi Xian smiled. "I already have someone in mind." Yi Xian and Jiangjiu sat on chairs within a hall, and Feng Lan, Mo Yuan, and Lu Jioge were standing before them. After a long time, Mo Yuan suddenly said, "You want the three of us to train this Dao soldier for you?" Yi Xian nodded. Mo Yuan spoke in a low voice. "Do you know that training a Dao soldier requires a huge amount of money?" Yi Xian replied, "I know. I'll deal with the money." Mo Yuan and Feng Lan gazed at Lu Jioge, because she was from the school of the militarist. Lu Jioge pondered deeply for a moment, and then she gazed at Yi Xian. "I will let them cultivate a cultivation technique called the murderous energy technique. This cultivation technique is suitable for soldiers to cultivate, but it's extremely expensive. Just cultivating this cultivation technique for a single soldier would cost at least 50 million gold coins. And that's in addition to everything else." Yi Xian almost fainted when he heard that. 50 million. Meanwhile, Lu Jioge said, "However, in the future, they will be one of the most terrifying Dao soldiers in the Azure continent. Of course, the precondition is that you're willing to spend the money." Yi Xian fell silent for a moment before he gritted his teeth. "Let's do it." End of this chapter. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.